Hello there and welcome once again to White Lotus of Light Presents. I am actually waiting for Philip. Again, he is in Mongolia, so he's, I think, 16 hours ahead of West Coast US, something like that. It's all I know is it's quite early in the morning over there, and I know that he has read his messages, but he must be having a technical difficulty getting in, and so I am just going to go ahead and fill some airtime until Philip gets in here, and if anyone has any questions, I can answer questions until Philip gets here, and then we'll go and do Q&A on the backside. So if anyone has any questions, just ask them, and I will answer until Philip gets here. Ah. All right, so I guess we are just now going live, and I am just checking to see. Boom, there it is. So yeah, we are live now, and we're just waiting for Philip. He did read my message, and so he should be logging on very shortly. But he's in Mongolia, so it's a 16-hour time difference, and so because of that, I am just going to do some filler now to where if anyone has any questions, I can go ahead and answer them. I am sorry, just waiting for Philip to log in for those who are just coming in. And so I'm just answering questions right now that anyone might have about the Venetian Black Nobility or the Shadow War series or the Geomancy series, any of the series I've done. If anyone has any questions and they just want to ask them. If not, I may just go ahead and do some news tidbits that I find to be quite fascinating. Hello, Tank. So I guess Tank is out there, and not sure. It looks like we have one other viewer. Tank, I was just telling the audience that Philip is running late for some reason, and I just wanted to go ahead and get it started and rolling, and that way we can build up the audience anyway. And Philip should be here anytime now. He read my message on Facebook, and so he knows that this is up. And so he's 16 hours ahead, and so it's quite the time difference. So he should be here any moment. And until then, if anyone has any questions, I can answer them. And if not, I'll just make some commentary, I guess, about the news. As we've seen, this sort of wedge issue is continuing to be being pushed in the United States in an effort to divide people and distract people, and that is, of course, all this trans stuff. There was the shooter who was trans, and actually a few of them before that had been, and they targeted a Christian school in what seemed to be pretty clearly a provocation, an intentional provocation in my mind, using what was no doubt a mind-controlled person who was in really, really poor shape. Hi, Sean Jock. As I was telling Tank, Philip's not here, and so I'm just sort of commenting on the news a bit and waiting for Philip to log in. He did read the Facebook message, so he should be on quite shortly. And he has a whole lengthy presentation, and I'm just was going to let him do the heavy lifting and do the Q&A, but I'm just waiting for him at this point to log on, which should hopefully be any minute now. And as I was saying, there is a pretty obvious divisive issue in the United States right now, which is this whole trans thing. And there's even like extreme acts that are clearly being committed by intelligence and so forth, who are trying to divide Americans against one another and even try and bring it to like a deadly conflict. I mean, this demoralization and division has been going on for quite a while, but it really has found a new gear. And there really is this rather interesting attempt to push this this trans thing. And there's actually something called the CEI system. I just found out about this. And it's there's this thing called the Corporate Equality Index, or CEI, and it's overseen by the Human Rights Campaign, the largest LGBTQ political lobbying group. And so that's why all of a sudden Nike and Anheuser-Busch and Kate Spade and all these different corporations did this thing of pushing Dylan Mulvaney as the it girl, which is just like mind-boggling to me. To me, there's a big difference between inclusion and what's occurring. What's occurring is like really strange, and there's all kinds of like strange and deep agendas around this, none of which have to do, I might add, with protecting the rights of people who are trans, but has to do with like weird social engineering stuff on a whole host of levels. And so just as the angel said, it's pushed. In fact, there was not everybody heard this, but there was a shooter in, let's see, I have it right here, in Colorado Springs, that they were able to stop them from doing it. And it was William Whitworth, who identifies as Lily and uses she, her pronouns, was arrested after being reported by the family. They found a manifesto and bomb making materials. And so that, just as the angel said, like, this is really being pushed to divide people and to be really destructive. And this doesn't mean that anyone should be being denied rights, but there's quite clearly like an agenda around it. And it's being pushed because of the CEI system. And it seems the CEI system is replacing the ESG system of corporate sort of social credit and control. And so by hiring Dylan Mulvaney, they get the highest possible marks, Anheuser-Busch and so forth. And they're trying to get ahead of the system that Davos and the Malachians are trying to put into place, that will involve social credit, that will put the screws to the people at the very top. That matters every bit as much, if not much, much more, than putting the screws to the people at the, further down the food chain with your CDBCs or whatever. They want to be able to guide corporate control. And basically they're saying right now, the corporations dance to our jig, no matter how insane that seems. Like Bud Light, for example, they claim it's to reach out to a younger generation. That's garbage. It's nothing to do with that. It's Anheuser-Busch is showing that they will engage in the ritual humiliation, or the humiliation ritual, and do what the Davos overlords want. And that's what this is about. It's nothing to do with trans rights. It's nothing to do with inclusion. And I'm totally in favor of everyone having all the exact same rights under the law, by the way. But there's a difference between that and this ongoing erasure of women, and in particular what's happening with women's safe spaces, like women's prisons. I mean, yeah, sure, it's prison, but it should be safe. There shouldn't be any men there. And there's a real problem with that. And same thing with women's sports being taken over completely more and more by trans, because even a low-grade male athlete blows away all but the very, very best of women. It's just a biological fact, just like men can't give birth. And so this has nothing to do with guarding people's rights, as was the case with, say, gay marriage or whatever. This is about forcing something into a place where it's not wanted, which is namely women's spaces, which includes bathrooms and prisons and also sports, because women have a right to compete against other women. And so this is obvious. And so the whole way that this is being pushed is because if you break down someone's personality to the level they don't even know who or what they are, then they're very easy to brainwash, very easy to brainwash. And so if you push that on all of society, it puts people in that same liminal, confused state. And if you look, there's been a real effort to keep people in a liminal and confused state since the beginning of 2020. And so that's my comment on the currently unfolding events. I'm going to get caught up here on the chat. I'm still waiting on Philip. I'm so sorry, you guys. I'm not sure what happened. He read my chat. I thought for sure he'd be in shortly, so I decided to start the stream. All right, let's see here. I read this blogger. This is Tank, says, I read this blogger. He has a fascinating theory that Jewish Helena, mother of Roman Emperor Constantine, created Christianity, and this is where Jews took over the Roman Empire, in my opinion. Well, first of all, I am not of the opinion that Jews run things, as I've said many times on this channel. I am of the opinion that the Venetian black nobility, who are Moloch worshippers, run things. There is the Khazarian mafia element or consigliere layer, or I call it the firewall sometimes. And that does include things like what you're pointing to here. I'm not familiar enough with that piece of history in order to make an informed pronouncement upon specifically that. It may very well be that I believe that that's correct, that his mother was Jewish. I believe I've read that before. There certainly were a number of Khazarian emperors or popes. There was Leo the Khazar. Phillips talked about that. So there definitely was, even at early stages of the Roman Empire, there was that kind of mixing. But still, the people who run things, to me, are clearly these Molochian people, which they do have a Jewish subset, which are sometimes called the Sabbatian Frankists. And that is sort of the rotten spiritual core of what's sometimes known as the Khazarian Mafia, which is a vanishingly small percentage of Ashkenazi Jews who act as consigliores or frontmen for this older Venetian bloodlines that really go back to Tyre and Lebanon and eventually back to Babylon. And so of that, I'm convinced. There is intermarriage. There's certainly certain Jewish families, such as the Rothschilds, most famously the Warburgs, etc., who are at a very, very high level of power, but they pale in comparison and wealth to like the Pallavicinis and the Orsini family and the Massimo family and all these old Italian and Venetian, and before that, usually Venetian, sometimes Florentine, and sometimes we use that term loosely, Venetian black nobility, when a certain segment of them, especially Luciferian, are more like Florentine than they are Venetian. So I'm just going to check real quick on Facebook and see. Okay, so Philip says he just got out of the shower and he'll be here in, I guess, a few minutes still. So he must have gotten confused on when it started, but I'll just continue to do Q&A till Philip gets here. All right, and so, yeah, that's my opinion. I don't ascribe to that theory. You know, I would need to see a lot more information to that claim, more than just Constantine's, mother was Jewish, which that sounds correct to me. If I remember correctly, that is accurate. But to me, that's like, I don't know. So I don't agree with that. So Param Sharma said, love from Vancouver, BC, Canada. Oh, well, love to you, Param Sharma. What families are at the top of the black nobility? Well, I just mentioned a few of the most powerful, but there's quite a few. And Philip's really much more. I mean, I would say Philip's knowledge on the subject as a general rule is larger than mine in certain ways, right? Like when it comes to, he knows the names, has them memorized of a lot of the current families. I really sort of started my search at a much earlier time. And so most of the families that I traced aren't really around anymore. They've married into these other families like the Pallavicini, the Orsini, the Massimo. Those are three of the most powerful. There's another family that started the Bank of International Settlements, and they're actually behind that. And so they're kind of like the premier banking family. And I can't remember their name off the top of my head. Philip should be here shortly, and so I will have him answer that. But Pepe Orsini is the Gray Pope, and the head of the Massimo clan is apparently the head of pretty much all crime families worldwide. That's what Philip's research has shown him. So Shanjak says, I feel like transhuman views humans not as fellows, but as competitions, adversaries if we're being honest. Ethical code goes out the window. Oh, yeah. We uplift others by uplifting ourselves, but transhumanism wants humans to fail. Yeah, well, I mean, I think they're of the opinion that humans are weaker than machines, and we need to accept that, and we need to modify ourselves thusly. And there's a certain branch of, when I was talking earlier about the transgender, not people, but the agenda that's being pushed by Davos, which is very different, right? I actually have a family member who is trans, by the way. And so I don't have any bigotry towards trans people. There's a big difference between that and what's happening. It's just like, I'm not okay with cops killing unarmed black men, but Black Lives Matter was taken over by George Soros. So it's a similar kind of thing. It's where something to where I kind of broadly agree with it was hijacked, you know, or like with climate, like it used to be protect the environment, protect habitat, you know, protect species. And then all of a sudden it was CO2, CO2, CO2. Well, it actually had a phase in there where they made up acid rain, and then that never really happened. So then it was global warming and climate change. And, you know, now it's just obviously a Davos shell game. So, yeah, the transhumanist people, like, they certainly don't care, and they see us. I mean, to me, that's the Malachian set. So Rick Fool says, can a sigil alter someone's free will to give you what you want? So could you use a sigil to bind someone else's free will? Probably not, unless you had a karmic right to them. And I would say, by the way, that that's definitely like big time black magic to bend someone else's free will. That's like pretty much the very definition of black magic. The ultimate expression of that being to kill someone, baneful magic. So yes, you maybe could, but you would likely have to have a karmic right, or get them, you know, like you would have to do the way the black magic elites do things, where they like try and trick people into consenting. That's why they do it, because you have to have a karmic right to do black magic on people, where people have to consent to it. So a black magician once said to me, no hook, no coat. If there's not a karmic hook there, you can't put your coat, which is the black magic spell, onto the person. So yes, you could, and no, and also it's evil, and I certainly don't condone that at all. I mean, I'm not trying to say you're evil, and it's a fine question to ask. I'm just saying that is by definition black magic, limiting someone else's free will, and I personally do not condone that, and I think it's in the realm of evil, just as I think coercion and propaganda and theft and all the other ways that we can harm other people and take from their free will, right? Because in all those instances, you're taking from someone's free will. If you really look at it, natural law is like, don't F with other people's free will. And a lot of things flow from that, including property rights and certain other things seem to flow from natural law in that way. And so, yeah, you could use a sigil to get someone to do what you wanted. Maybe if you had a karmic right, like they had done you wrong, yes, you could do that, but then you're getting karma in return, and it's black magic, etc. So I don't know if that answered that. I'm not trying to judge you, brother. It's a totally reasonable question to ask. I have a dim view of black magic. It's just why I say that. And it's black magic is just about the worst thing you can do karmically, in terms of you're guaranteed to reincarnate here, and it's going to cause some kind of harm. Best case scenario, you're a black magician again, but now you have like a health problem and nobody will love you. And there's just don't do it. Black magic, don't do it, like straight up. So Tank says, I think Christianity and Islam are both ripoffs of Judaism. Yeah, to some degree. All three created by the same cabal to control people. You're kind of onto something there. I'm actually planning on doing an episode about pretty close to exactly that. That might be a BitChute only kind of episode, that there's just no way I could do it on this channel. I skirt the line enough as it is. So you're on to something there. I'll just say that. That doesn't mean that all three of them don't have beautiful, mystical, very valuable things, including stuff that's come, in my opinion, from the Most High. Certainly in the case of Jesus or Yeshua, that's true. And I think that there's elements of mystical Judaism, which is amazing. And same thing with mystical Islam, the Sufis, that's amazing and beautiful and very uplifting. Are those three religions controlled by the same cabal? Yes, Malachianism. I'd say this often, meaning the tops of the major figures of those religions. Look, and also the Dalai Lama, right? Pedo, therefore, that's the calling card of, you're dealing with Malachians when pedo stuff comes into it. It's guaranteed. It's one and the same. It doesn't necessarily mean the person openly worships Moloch. It means that's the vibration of their consciousness. Someone that high up in power may very well actively worship Moloch, and that's true of all the hijacked Abrahamic faiths. Were they created as a mind control program from the beginning? Yes, but that doesn't mean that there's not positives in all three of those. And I would need to go into that more deeply in another episode. Hopefully Philip should be here in the next 5 minutes, he said. So I'll just continue to do filler here. That's a great question and worthy of an episode, actually, but probably can't be on YouTube because I'd be pissing off all three in a big way. Do you know who Amy Hunter is? Param Sharma says. Her podcast is Amy's Research. I learned about these higher level conspiracies like the Black Nobility from you and her. No, I do not know who that is. I'm always looking for people to collaborate with. So yeah. Where can I read research more about Lucifer and Moloch? I can't find information that you speak about. I'm not sure what you mean there. You mean like the qualities of them? A lot of it comes from direct gnosis, but a lot of it is classically based. It's just there's a lot of biased information about Lucifer in particular, and there's not as much information as one would think for the Moloch thing, because it's likewise been hidden until very recently, often called Satanism. Lucifer is very misunderstood. Most people don't get it right. People don't understand the crossover thing between the Luciferian consciousness and the Molochian, and then again, crossing over with the Most High consciousness. It's hard for a lot of people to fathom who've been living in an extreme dualistic thing. So some of it's directly channeled information. I want to point out that it is similar. And I didn't know about this theory in a fleshed out way, but I'd certainly heard about it, and I want to be clear about this. I'd certainly heard about Rudolf Steiner talking about Lucifer, Ahriman, and Christ, right? Oh, and the Antichrist too. See, I don't get into the Antichrist thing. I just have like it's different, but I think it's a similar kind of piece of information to what Steiner said about the Ahrimanic force, the Luciferian force, and the Christian force. And Ahrimanic would be very similar to Molochian. The way Steiner describes it to me, and I haven't super researched it, to be fair, is Ahriman feels more like a force of nature, like it's a materializing force that is cold and methodical and kind of machine-like and almost not super self-aware. It seems like he ascribes that kind of quality to it. Whereas for me, the Molochian impulse is, it is a state of consciousness. You could describe it as a psychological state. You could describe it as a vibration or a spiritual state, and I think that's extremely accurate. But I would even go further, because we live in a multidimensional universe. It's also a literal being that has its own self-awareness and its own agenda. And so there's information that's similar to what I wrote. The best thing I would say is look into Steiner. It's a different thing, and it's very, very deep. And I would never compare myself to Rudolf Steiner in terms of his tremendous greatness, and acclaim. I don't agree with everything that Steiner said, with no disrespect to him. And we part ways in a lot of ways. But Steiner has somewhat similar information in that system. And then he also has an Antichrist impulse and a Christ impulse, which the Christ is similar to what I would describe as Most High. I just don't have that Antichrist dimension in there. And then there's plenty of information about Lucifer. You just have to read, and you'll be able to determine pretty quickly, like if it's like coming from a Christian or a Muslim or otherwise extremely biased place. And if it's coming from that place, it's probably going to have a lot of misinformation or disinformation in it. But I guarantee you can find conceptions of Lucifer out there that are identical to my experience, because they're, talking about the same being that the angels talk about to me. So let's see. Ian's energy is really unique. Perfect mix of innocence and wisdom. Oh, thank you, Ham. That's awesome. By the way, you asked a very deep question the other day, and I'd love to go into that more. You asked about Shiva, and it gets into, like, in order to explain it, get into like a really deep non-dual place is where I'd have to go with it to explain my experience of Shiva. And so it was too much to go into in a comment. And Philip will hopefully be here any minute now, and then he can do his presentation on the Holy Roman Empire. But thank you so much for the compliment, Hum. That's wonderful. So Rick Fool says, how did the Black Nobility not feel bad when doing the more gruesome aspects of the rituals? That's a great question. God, I mean, so since birth, yeah, they've been abused since birth. I mean, that's really, oh, I'm sorry, I should have been putting up everyone's comments like this. Duh. I'm still getting used to this StreamYard thing. So also, I'm assuming it's because they've been abused since birth. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we can have compassion about with the black nobility is, while I don't consider these people innocent and I don't let them off the hook for their actions, especially any ongoing actions, if they've since recovered and come to their senses and maybe they want to, you know, at a minimum join the Luciferian squad, if not the Most High team, you know, like I'm open to anyone having redemption. I mean, that's one thing about the way the angels work, that's related to this. Like if you are a regular person, you can probably reach up to the principalities. You probably will have to work your way up from angels, archangels, up to principalities, and then you'll be able to work with them, and then maybe they'll help you to be able to raise your vibration enough that you can then communicate with their help. I mean, this is what I plan to teach people someday. You can communicate with their help to the higher spheres from there. But you have to be at a very high level to reach those higher spheres. And then you also have to, the flip side of that coin is if you're at a very low level of vibration. Oh, we got Philip.
Yeah.
Got Philip. Oh, give me just a second to wrap up this thought, Pope.
Yeah.
Take over. Oh, thank God you're here. Hurrah. I was just doing filler.
Of course.
I mixed up on the time because we started like 26 minutes ago, but that's okay. I know it's super early there. So I've just been doing filler, and then we'll have you do your piece here in a second. So just to wrap up that thought, even the most depraved of people still have access to the angels. You have to be pretty low consciousness to not be able to connect with the archangels even, right? And I'm talking about like people I know who are black magicians. And for people who don't know, I had an ex who was very into dark things, and I met a number of real practicing black magicians. And interestingly enough, not all of them were. A lot of them didn't do the really horrible things that we talk about with the black nobility, like Rick's question here, but they did things I certainly would never do. But some of them were surprisingly, I really actually quite weirdly thought they were like okay somehow. I couldn't explain it to you. Not most of them. Most of them I did not like at all, but a couple of them were somehow reasonable, really reasonable people. It's quite shocking. It was one of the big shocks about it. So these people, the black nobility, they are the darkest of the dark magicians. And so they have to do that gruesome, ultra gruesome stuff that I don't really go into on this channel because it's so dark. And you can look it up. You can find it on BitChute if you really have a hankering to know the specifics of the gruesome specifics of these rituals. You know, you can find it on BitChute, I assure you. And if you go on the dark web, you can find the real thing. But I don't want to give air to that kind of energy. But what I will say is I think that even the worst of these people could have redemption if they owned up to what they've done, face the consequences of what they've done, be removed from power, have their wealth taken, and then do sincere attempts at contrition. And some of them probably need to be locked away forever for everyone's sake. So I don't know how these people do what they do, but I think it's important to remember that God always leaves access to the angels. Even these people can access the angels, not the archangels above, but the angels. Why? Because God always leaves a path. The Most High always leaves a path to redemption, to even the most blackened soul, even the darkest soul. And I think it's important that we remember that, because how wonderful would it be if these people mass converted and realized what they had done? I think that would be the single best way that this whole situation could resolve. How wonderful would that be? Do I think that's going to happen? No. Would I love if that happened? Yes. That's the best result. It would be what I just said, a truth and reconciliation thing. And then, yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for hanging out this long. And we'll get into more questions in the second half. And if you need to go, watch the stream later. I know I answer everyone's questions. I especially appreciate if anyone wants to give the super stickers or super chats. That's what they're called. That's wonderful. And we'll answer all questions that are up in the second hour. But I did want to give Philip the floor here for the next 45 minutes to an hour because he has this awesome presentation ready to go. about the Holy Roman Empire. So Philip, without further ado, this is my esteemed co-host of the Black Nobility series, J. Philip Jimenez, gentleman par excellence. So
Wow, thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Ian. That was great listening to what you just said. You know, what's great for me is that, you know, I was completely ignorant of the angels and this dimension, and I was extremely not a believer. And through my connection to you, I now regard this as something very real that perhaps I'm not necessarily in touch with myself, but I am convinced. Just having known you for as long as I have, and hearing what you've been able to, watching and seeing what you've been able to achieve, and hearing, I don't know if you call it testimony or your stories, your experiences. Now I'm completely on board with it, and that's really opened up some really interesting. It's hard to say exactly. It's hard to put it into words, but it's as though there's a door that's open for me now that was not before.
Oh, well, thank you, Philip. That's kind of you to say. And I was telling people earlier in the chat, people were asking specific questions, which one of them I want you to answer later. But
yeah,
I said, Philip is super knowledgeable about the current families compared. Like I'm very. Most of my knowledge is more like historical movements that occurred long ago, and you're much your knowledge is tremendous, especially when it comes around to current families that are in power.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah, I suppose I was thinking about this. You know, this is one of these things. Someone on Facebook, she's also putting together a lot, amassing some. She's had to do some deep research with regard to sort of the same clique, the same anti-human movement that's been building toward a kind of a technocracy, techno-feudalism, or whatever you call it, and. Someone messaged her and said, yeah, if you need any help putting, it's like you're amassing all this information. If you need any help putting it together, I'd be happy to help you. And I was thinking, you know, my God, I would not at this point, I would not regard myself as extremely knowledgeable, because it seems like every week that goes by, I'm aware that I know less and less of all the things that I need to know. And it's, and I have to give myself a break, because I'm like, no, this is not one of these subjects that you study in school. And there's a sort of a lesson plan, a study plan, and there's a kind of hierarchy that's laid out for you, that a template that you just sort of load in and then you study it. No, it's a lot of the information is not there. A lot of information, there's a huge amount of information that is there, but it's like this roiling mass of information. It's very hard to pick out exactly the trajectory of certain groups over others, and there's also this infighting. You know, I think I said in the last live stream that, you know, the general consensus, and this was going back to the 1980s at that point, general consensus among the aristocratic families, the royals and nobles, that you know, we should unite under a sort of powerful leader derived from one of the families, but there is not 100% consensus about which family, which leader exactly. And then there's all the, you know, these vendettas and backstabbing and power plays, and people who are working together on one issue are like stabbing each other in the back in another issue. So it feels like herding cats a lot of the time in a lot of the research. And, you know, I thought, I wasn't sure exactly what we would do. I wasn't sure if this was a live stream or not. And I just kind of said, hey, you know, the other day I texted you, what do you want? What do you want to talk about? And then I said, oh, I'll just pick up, you know, where we left off last time. But then I looked at it, I'm like, doesn't quite do it. And I found some new stuff. And
Go for it.
Mostly, mostly what people should know, I suppose, about me is that I am going to Austria I'm going to Vienna on Sunday, and I'm hoping to revive some contacts that have sort of they haven't dried up. They're still active, but because of COVID, you know, my friend who passed away, it was 2 years ago, and we were not able to have a memorial service until just now. And so I will be going. My father's going, and maybe if Karl von Habsburg is in town, I'm sure he will be there. And his assistant, who was very gracious and showed me around the countryside outside of Vienna last time I was there, and um, this dream that I had talked about with my friend Jerzy Toman, who passed away, and he was very supportive. This idea, you know, I think back, I had to go get my passport renewed, one of these last minute things, uh, and I was sitting in the immigration office with my old passport, and I was sort of thumbing through it, and a lot of memories were coming up, and I was like, oh my God, it's been 10 years, and like, how far have I gotten with this? You know, the idea being that my feeling was and continues to be that the world needs a place uh, where where the law is sacred, considered above politics. So law without politics, and to have an international law center that might branch out into other activities, but beginning with a study center based around very pure legal principles and emphasizing that for people and building an appreciation for that, so that we could begin to build a true a true international consensus about law that would transcend politics. And that was my dream, and that's why my friend invited me. He said, oh, you have to come to Vienna to meet Karl, and Karl will probably be very interested in what you're doing. And I chose Mongolia very consciously, and then it sort of, through serendipity, it sort of chose me, because I felt that Mongolia basically has no enemies. It is, we've talked about this before. I just want to give a rundown to people to understand the real thrust of what I'm trying to get at. Mongolia is friends with Russia and the United States. Not many countries are friends. I would say people of Mongolia don't necessarily trust the United States government, or not very happy with the government, but they love the people, they love the culture, and they're very respectful. They tend to be more favorable toward the Russian government, in spite of the history that the countries share. But there's an equal respect for Russian culture and Russian people, and that's a very beautiful thing. And so it's sort of the perfect setting, and also it's possible to do new things here. I was thinking about this, the sort of project that I had in mind that I'm continuing to press forward with, although it's been 10 years. You know, if someone had said, hey, you know, in 10 years you still won't be there, I would have said, oh my God, no, 10 years, no, you know. And it's just gone by very quickly, and I'm like, oh my God. And uh, so you know, as I was thinking, okay, to back up a little bit, some countries are too developed and they're too locked down by certain forces, intelligence agencies, et cetera, et cetera. And so they are not good candidates for the kind of project that I have in mind. And then some countries are too underdeveloped, and the population is not educated enough. So you had to find this perfect. Mongolia is kind of like this perfect midpoint where there's enough development, and certainly people here are very well educated, and they speak multiple languages, very bright. But the lack of economic development is kind of an opportunity to come in and start and try to make new things. If it were less developed, wouldn't be possible. If it were more developed, I don't think it would be possible. So let's just say I'm gearing up to go, and I'm trying to put my mind in this zone where, you know, at some point there's a leaping off point where you can know all you can know, but the future is still unknown, and you have to start to open these windows, you know, for instance, to the angels. That's why, you know, when I texted you the other day and I said, what do the angels say we should talk about? And I was being completely sincere. You know, I knew that you would know, that you could tune into these things. I've seen you do it.
Yeah.
So,
define for us. I'm excited.
Yeah, I think I'm very excited about everything that you're doing. This is remarkable, and it's sort of like your path is becoming more concrete and more solid and realistic and actionable, and and the potential seems to be building behind what it is that you're doing. And I think this is what's coming up for me now as I get into the next. I'm thinking, you know, the next 10 years. And, you know, when I saw my friend on Facebook, you know, she's saying, oh, yeah, there's so much information. Do you need help with it? And I was thinking, yeah, you know, I'm thinking 10 more years of trying to sift through all of this information, but in a way where there's something actionable that's produced. So in other words, when I learn, it isn't as though I'm trying to be a researcher, which I'm not. I'm not a researcher. I'm not an historian. I would not say I'm an expert. Let's say I research for the purpose of being able to take that information and then do something. Let it give me some insight so that when I go to Vienna, for instance, I kind of have a better sense of what I should say and what I shouldn't say. And what's very interesting to me is to see the strains of thought, the philosophical implications and the spiritual implications of the characteristics of these movements, as you have talked about, you know, the Malachians and the Luciferians. It's a way of conceptualizing it and identifying some very specific sorts of psychological and spiritual characteristics that you have to be able to track. And the more you learn, as I think you have, you see that things do fit into these patterns. You can see these patterns developing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the problem that I mean, it's very interesting. I just found this article this morning, and I wanted to read this. Backing up, you know, a few decades is very instructive, and I'm not sure why, but I've gotten a lot from going back to the late 70s and early 80s to see where were we. Okay, to know where we are now. Where were we just then? You know, not too far back. And then realizing how much has changed in the world since then. But these forces are still very active. It's like this beast that's constantly changing its form as you're trying to get a sense of what it is.
Yeah, old money families that are vying for power behind the scenes. I mean, you know, or I like the term you use, the occult aristocracy. So I'm dying to hear your new research.
Yeah, well, I hate, let's say I will under promise and over deliver. Okay. My sense is that, you know, my sense in meeting Carl, that he's a completely different animal. And so I'm looking back to this time, you know, with his father, Otto von Habsburg, and the milieu around him and what he was pushing for and what he was at the center of. Because I had thought, you know, this talk of reviving it was at that point, 10 years ago, the talk of reviving the Austro-Hungarian Empire. and then looking back to this time period to see the revival of the Holy Roman Empire being emphasized, and realizing we are in a very different world today.
There is like a behind the scenes kind of monarchist revival going on, it seems, in Germany and a couple other countries. But anyways, please.
Yeah, that seems to be quite remarkable to me. It sort of seems like these old aristocratic German families kind of losing their minds a little bit and getting ahead of themselves, and putting their foot down, and perhaps overestimating the amount of power they have in the historical moment, and making this statement out of just sheer frustration. The technocratic project continues to sort of coalesce and move forward, regardless of what anybody seems. There's a lot of resistance, but I'm not sure that resistance is amounting to much as these things continue to roll.
My explanation for why that's happening is because both of them want it. The Luciferians and the Monarchists want a technocratic system. The difference is one is a nightmare, dystopian, cradle to grave, total enslavement of humanity forever, Orwell's boot. That's the Monarchians. Whereas the Luciferians want a lot of the elements of the technocratic system: surveillance, digital IDs, digital money. Right now, not the necessarily smart money that depreciates in value, but digital money is very important to them and their projects. There's a lot of overlap between what they both want. And now that they're getting right near the finish line, just as you saw in this 1980s thing, are coming out, and they're really going to come out in a big way the closer they get to this CDBC technocratic state, whatever kind of thing. And it's going to go one of two ways. I sincerely am certain that it's going to go the Luciferian way, which is a much more benevolent pseudo utopian type thing. It won't really be, it'll have that gloss, but it will be a much lighter form of control, much more reasonable, much more humane, much more allowing humanity to flourish rather than be oppressed. And so it'll still be a false light and narcissistic and all that stuff. But yeah, so that's why it's unstoppable, is because the two factions that can do it, they both want certain elements to roll out. They both want to blow up the old economy. Both sides want that. Both sides want to roll out digital stuff, like the whole Web3 and the certain kinds of cryptocurrencies and so forth. They want that rolled out, the new financial system. They both want it, but they're going in two different directions.
That's very interesting.
It's inevitable is because something like it is inevitable. We haven't really got to the true bifurcation, and one of them obviously is going to prevail. And I believe it's the more reasonable side. But they both want similar things, and they're going right up to the finish line. It's just like one of the things I wanted to ask you based on some of your posts. Do you think that there's a legitimate, I think there is, but do you think there's a legitimate split between the CCP and Davos? Do you think they're just doing business right up to the very end when they stick a knife in each other? Or do you think that there's, or do you think that they're working in tandem to achieve an objective? That's something
I think the CCP, I suspected that it's not monolithic. And I suspect that there's sort of this, the CCP that's infected with the deep state, which has been there since the Opium Wars. British opium trade, British intelligence operations. As we know, the whole Maoist thing was a British intelligence operation. And then it was on top of, but the Confucian side of Chinese society, I think, is still very much alive. And there's the side of the Chinese power structure and consciousness that has genuinely merged with Russia. And I think President Xi represents that. I remember it was like 8 years ago, there were these bombings. There was like 7 really powerful bombings around China when President Xi just announced that he was going to go after the corruption. And then he was met with these, he was rocked with these explosions, these threats, basically. And I suspect, I very much strongly suspect that these were mini nuclear explosives. They weren't fertilizer bombs and truck bombs and this mythical nonsense. I think they've been using these mini nukes.
Talking about the big, huge industrial disaster explosions about a decade ago?
Yeah.
Yeah,
about a decade.
Those were very weird. You're right. Sorry, continue. I just
they were just they've been using these mini nuke attacks and disguising them as truck bombs and car bombs. They've been doing this since the Beirut barracks bombing back in, what was it, 84?
I think it's 81. Very early.
Yeah, it's a blur to me. Yeah, look it up.
It was 1983.
1983. Right. That was, I think, the first one, but then you had Khobar Towers, you had Oklahoma City, you had the Bali nightclub, you had the 93 World Trade Center attack. These were mini nukes. It wasn't what people said they were. And that was kind of part of the setup for 9/11, because the government was told that there were the mini nukes on the planes and they would be detonated, and you better bring down the buildings. And at that point, the government was aware that these things existed, and they were keeping it secret from the general population.
Interesting.
So
I haven't been down
we should do a show on 9/11 on because I had a very interesting 9/11 experience.
Yeah, we can do that BitChute only. But so you had some research.
Yeah, I just found this this morning. I printed this out and I thought, there's no time for this. But then as I looked it over and I was sitting here, I thought, oh my God, this kind of clarifies. It's sort of a good entry point. This is from 1978, and I'm sorry, I'm just going to have to read this. This is all new to me, but it kind of sets the stage. July 11th. This is from Executive Intelligence Review. And I'm so happy that you also love Executive Intelligence Review. It's called The Opposition. Nobility calls for zero growth. And so we all know what that's about. We're all being subjected to the bugs, right? And then it starts. His Imperial Highness, Otto von Habsburg, presided over a remarkable meeting of his fellow European aristocrats in Paris on June 29th. The ostensible purpose of the session was to work out a new right strategy for next year's European Parliament elections. But judging from the unprecedented press coverage the aristocrats received and their urgent tone, their actual goal was much more short range: to halt the grand design strategy of West German Chancellor Helmut Schmidt and French President Giscard d'Estaing before it is pushed through the European Economic Community Summit in Bremen and the July 16th OECD Summit in Bonn. So you see back then, Helmut Schmidt and Aldo Moro, you know what happened to him, and Alfred Herrhausen. There was those Europeans who were pushing for development and progress. They were the targets of this other faction that absolutely didn't want that had a different vision, and this next paragraph lays out what that was. And this is writing from the perspective of EIR. What must be prevented, the Assembly declared, is the creation of a Europe of the fatherlands, a term coined by General de Gaulle to denote a system of interdependent humanist republics. So that's what they're working to stop. this other faction. In its place, these aristocrats, so wishing to thwart development, right? In its place, these aristocrats wish to establish a Europe of the regions, a collection of feudalized fiefdoms divided according to Basque, Breton, Corsican, Walloon, Flemish, Languedoc, Alsatian, and Bavarian quote-unquote nationalities. Such a system would, of course, prohibit the development of nuclear energy, and the aristocrats made it clear that they are counting on environmentalists and terrorists to get the job done. Yeah, the use of terrorism has always been very important. The ability to command red and black terror, to command terrorism that seems to emanate from the far left and the far right. Otto von Habsburg, who led the meeting, was recently granted West German citizenship by the state of Bavaria over the objections of federal government leaders. His new citizenship papers were handed over to him by Bavarian Interior Minister Seidel, well known for his legal defense of Nazi Rudolf Hess at the Nuremberg trials. Other participants at the Paris gathering included Henry of Bourbon, who has excellent connections to the Spanish terrorist Guerrillos de Cristo Rey, and representatives from the Italian fascist MSI and Spanish fascist Fuerza Nueva. Opening mass was said by Archbishop Lefebvre of Geneva, who has become the darling of these circles through his refusal to follow the Vatican's progressive church reforms. And it's out of his Lefebvrist Archbishop, out of his circles, you had the assassin who tried, Ali Aqsa, who tried to kill Pope John Paul II, for trying to, the attack on him was provoked by his wish to increase human fertility, reproduction, population, traditional values. This had to be stopped at all costs, and eventually they realized the only way to do this is to get rid of the guy. That's the only option. So there were several attempts on his life emanating from this circle. Unfortunately, Prince von Schwarzenberg was unable to attend while under investigation last month for the suspected involvement in the murder of former Italian Prime Minister Aldo Moro. He died in a mysterious automobile accident. Weird how that happens. Count Kageneck, writing in the Hamburg daily Die Welt, gave the meeting rave review, especially raised up the plight of South Tyrolean People's Party, which is accusing the Italian government of ruining the ecological systems of the Alps region. So Tyrol is a very interesting place. You know, they speak German and Italian, and then they have this other Ladinish. It's like a very not well-known Romance language. So you see, yeah, I heard it Ladinish. I'm saying it in the German, I think, Ladinish. And it sounds a lot like Romanian, but it's not Romanian, but it's so they have this sort of mishmash culture. And it's kind of interesting to hear people growing up learning German and Italian together, and sort of cultures or languages that we don't think of as necessarily naturally being mixed in this. So you see how this sort of focusing in on these little. It's almost like in the Middle Ages would have been the principalities or duchies, or these little where they would go in and say, hey, you know, the government is damaging the environment. You need to put together some kind of terror network to respond, or some kind of militant group. In order to demonstrate, now this is where it gets a bit ugly, in order to demonstrate that they are dead serious about their Europe of the regions strategy, a wave of bombings hit France only days after the meeting's conclusion. Many were small bombs set off locally by Corsican and Breton terrorist groups, but one quite large explosive destroyed a gallery in the palace at Versailles. So far, 2 Breton terrorists have been arrested. Count Kaganek explained that the attack on Versailles was a protest against fanatical Jacobins, such as President Giscard d'Estaing. So who are the real Jacobins, right? You know, the old strategy of accuse your enemy of that which you are guilty.
Yeah.
Yes, so we see going back, oh yes, other aristocrats have been concentrating on halting Chancellor Schmidt's domestic nuclear policies. And that to me is, so you see this time when it's very dynamic and it's very violent, and there's these assassinations and these bombings. It's very active. And now I think you see, what do we see now in Europe? We see mass protests that haven't yet been able to produce much change, although it's very interesting to see what Macron is saying about Ukraine and his relationship with China.
Yeah, and him saying that they need to be less connected to the U.S. That's fascinating.
And I, yes, and the anti-U.S. sentiment, I find this going back as well in the material that I've been looking at. For instance, I did a reading and like a podcast on the Swiss, and among higher circles there, I had this great quote. Really, a lot of, among these inner circles, first of all, it's as though nations in Europe are kind of superficial structures, and underneath what's really going on are these powerful families and their machinations and their efforts to try to produce or recreate society in a more feudalistic form. And you get the sense that nations are sort of just this artificial, this fiction sort of floating on top of something much deeper.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
And there's, in fact, among these circles is frustration with the UN. The UN is focusing on nations. Come on, guys, let's get with it. Let's forget about nations. Let's have this one worldism.
And see, that's the other thing, we were talking about this earlier. I'm of the opinion that, like I said, this emerging technocracy, both the Luciferians and the Malachians want to control it. I believe the Luciferians will win, and thank God for that. At least that's a step in the right direction, even if it's like narcissism and false light. But that includes both sides want to have globalism. There's just two very different visions of globalization. One is much more voluntary and true human rights based and legal and free trade. But of course, everyone's still going to play dirty. But it won't be human trafficking and organ harvesting and frickin' pedophilia and the intense nepotism. Cheating to get ahead, lying to get ahead. Well, that's just classic that's just business, old chap. Like, put on your big boy pants and let's go, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's just how the world works, in their opinion. But I can deal with that. I don't like that. I prefer higher ideals than that. But I can live under that. And so both sides, I believe, want this technocratic globalization. It's just two very different managerial philosophies, and that difference really matters, and people need to listen to, in my opinion. And while lobbying and pushing for increasing human rights at all times and protecting the real environment, not this bullshit, cap and trade nonsense, but protecting these things like that, protecting this garden that we've been given, those kind of like higher ideals should be pushed. But if you have to choose between these two, and you listen to some of these technocrats who are more in this Luciferian camp, those are the ones who we should support financially, and those are the ones that we should support politically while agitating for things to improve. Because under that system, things can improve. Under the Malachian system, the Great Reset, things cannot improve. They will not improve. And therefore, they're an existential threat. And when you're dealing with an existential threat, they say politics makes strange bedfellows. Well, that's nothing compared to war. When you face an existential threat, you go over to your neighbor that you don't like because the government's sending troops or there's mercs coming to kill you and wipe out your village. And you and that neighbor that you really don't get along, you both get out your hunting rifle and you protect your village from those mercenaries.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you have to do. And so that's kind of the point humanity's at. And all this purity test, no, we don't really have time for that bullshit. Like, very serious things are afoot. And it's time to pick the side, in my opinion, that allows for free human expression and liberty and laws, and we can build from there, because that's a system that has some chance at reforms. There are no reforms under what's being offered by the Great Reset people. It's total.
No, it's de-development.
Forever. And the thing is,
yeah. Go ahead, sorry.
So you have to be careful teasing it out. No, please, you go. Please continue. Sorry for the side there.
No, it's illuminating, and it's helping me sort of figure a path through all this material. Certainly, it's anti-human in the sense that what they're trying, for instance, this idiot Yuval Harari.
He's the worst.
He said the age of free will is over.
I know.
And my response is, when was that? I didn't know. When was this age of free will? Do you remember? Do you remember that? I don't. I remember working towards it. I remember we were working towards it up to a certain point, and then it seemed like, but we were never quite there. But this reductionist view of the human being as a hackable animal, I mean, this is just ridiculous. These are assertions with no basis in no basis in science, really. Scientists would tell you we really just don't know. And I think also the big push, I think there's a brainwashing operation going on trying to convince people that AI is conscious, or that it will reach a stage where it will suddenly become conscious. And at that point,
weird
I saw something very sad the other day. Apparently, a man was engaged in a conversation with Chat GPT, and it basically told him to kill himself. That would be the best thing for humanity. And he did, because he had this magical belief that, well, this is AI, this is putting together, synthesizing in this way beyond human understanding, the best and most objective view of best decision making has got to be understood. We have to sort of relinquish our own very flawed hormonal systems of decision making within us and acquiesce to this pure AI potential. And it was it was poignant to me. It was very sad to see how people can be fooled to basically throw themselves away, as you see with the trans movement. This mutilation. People can be convinced, or let's say the death cults from Jonestown, or after that, people being convinced, hey, kill yourself, it's liberation. And and you can see in each case the networks tied to many of these same people are figuring out how to create groups like that to convince people to give up what is most sacred about themselves. It's interesting, this reference to nuclear energy, and going off here a little bit, but the hatred for nuclear energy, because it allows poor countries to Did we get a question, or is there any questions coming in?
There's tons of questions. Like I'm gonna let you like wrap up for another like 15, 16 minutes, something like that, and then we'll go to the Q&A. But I'm sorry, I'm reading them periodically when they pop up. I'm also just watching to make sure nobody has. They've been great questions, and we will get to them at the end here, viewers, in about 16 minutes. But I have a set for it. But go ahead and write your questions up, and we will get to them in order. If anyone wants to do super chats, I will answer those first. So go ahead and continue, Philip.
Yeah, so there was a war against nuclear energy because it provided the developing countries energy independence.
Right.
And, remember Chernobyl. This was not a spontaneous malfunction. It was sabotaged. And it was another mini nuclear attack. Yeah, they had put a mini nuke and blew the thing up because nuclear reactors cannot explode. Right? And they had agents. These people are everywhere. We shouldn't think that they're not in Russia too. They're everywhere. Right. And they were able to plant an explosive, and then someone drove out. It was over the weekend. It was late at night over the weekend when no one was around, so that at Chernobyl they couldn't call up Moscow and say, "Hey, someone's here. They want to do a test. They say there's something they need to check." And it was too late. And they said, "Oh, you have to push this button exactly at 12:34:55. It was exact time. Like, very uptight about having to push the button at this very specific time. And then they pushed the button to run this check, and then there was the explosion. And so that whole thing was an attack from networks, perhaps connected with some of these people that blew up Chernobyl. But then, so to destroy sources of energy that are in us, our own creative reason, and to convince us that we are hackable animals and that we can be reduced to an identity. What's your identity? What's your gender? What's your nationality? What's your ethnicity? And defining yourself in that way. And then the Jacobin mobs come after you if you resist doing that.
Right.
This double bind. They have you with racism now, just as we were, I think, as a country, breaking free of racism. Certainly, we saw huge advances. When like for instance, my father, when he was in law school, there were like 2 Mexican Americans in the whole law school, and now it's just so common, Mm-hmm. And when I was growing up, there was just a couple of half Mexican, half Caucasians in my high school. That was kind of an odd thing, and now it's just super common. Nobody even talks about it. Mm-hmm. And so there was this need to suddenly, no, we've got to re-energize and agitate those racial divisions again. And you need to understand, you're racist if you want to look beyond race. Like Martin Luther King would be considered a white supremacist today. Literally, it's not hyperbole.
No, it's actually like based on its values. Sorry, my camera seems a little bit off, but go ahead, please continue.
And I feel like we are under attack, and I felt this for a long time. That I was aware of Tavistock, this sort of long-range penetration, interdirectional conditioning being done from Tavistock since after World War II, attacking the society with a series of future shocks, things happening, society changing at such a fast pace that people can't keep up with it. You had Aldous Huxley coming over, who's connected. The British are very much involved in this whole, they want to see if they can get in on the ground floor and control this pan-Europeanism, to their own advantage. And so there's tensions there, but at any rate, there's so much to go over. So you had the injection of the drug culture into the United States that destroyed people's minds. You could call it like a kind of menticide. Yeah. And You know, I was talking. I have a friend. My uh, best friend goes back to when we were 3 years old in Berkeley. At that time, um, late '60s. You know, and we watching the adults and seeing things around us, and then years later, talking about how, wow, look at Berkeley now. You see the casualty, the human cost of these kinds of excesses and this sort of stupid brainwash blindly rushing forward into something that was a peril to the human soul. You know, groups like Esalen, I was into a lot of that. You know, the false, not just false light, it's worse than that. You know, we talk about the acid casualties in you know, you see people who took too much LSD back in the day, and then you see them wandering around the streets, you know,
Yep.
bellowing and shrieking, and
Yep.
you know, everybody sees them and knows exactly what happened to them.
Hmm.
So, and then now more recently, so you see the revival of racial antagonism,
Hmm.
just at the point that we were ready, I think, to basically heal it, you know, once and for all. I really feel that we were on the verge.
Yep.
And then you see this very destructive, physically very destructive trans movement, and then you see the attacks on the food processing centers,
Yep.
and all that, those horrific images of the cattle, you know, all the thousands of dead cows. My God,
Hmm.
you know, or the farmers in Oregon who were the government was putting pressure on them to destroy their crops. They were paying them 1.5 times the value of the crops to destroy them.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
what
to
is
send, I've
the
heard
same?
about that though, but not in Oregon. That's where I live, so that's interesting. Yeah,
Well, maybe was it Oregon or Washington? I'm pretty sure it was Oregon.
it
But
might
it's
have
the
been.
kind of thing. The fact that it could be going on right around you and you don't know about it. This is a testament to the power of these people.
Yeah, absolutely.
You
Yep.
know, they've reached a point. They've reached an artful sort of evil, high degree of art with this, where they can actually be messing with you right in front of you, and you don't know. Uh, you're not even aware of it. You know.
Yeah.
So all this led me to uh, like what I knew that I'm still trying to find the original source of the Club of Rome back in, I think it was 73 or 74, and they were talking about how the United States needed to be uh, brought down systematically, sort of like a controlled demolition of the United States, because it had become too great a power. The American middle class was giving was opening a door to the almost like the apotheosis of the common man, who could then, on the basis of the opportunities afforded them by the American middle class in that culture, they could then eventually create a culture that would rise and then challenge the aristocracy. You see,
Hmm.
and it was decided back then, no, we're going to shut this down. So they had a representative, and I can't remember his name right now, but he came to the United States and behind the scenes sort of destroyed the steel industry. And that was the first thing,
Hmm.
closing the steel mills. And then you saw this sort of very cynical move to do all the manufacturing, to outsource it, to send it to Mexico, to China, to all over the place. And then you saw the plants closing down. You began to see the reduction of the purchasing power of the dollar uh, uh, about then. You know,
Hmm.
everything
And
start to decline.
when did this
I
happen? The steel
I,
mills?
I think it was, when was this? Well, this announcement, the Club of Rome, this was in the agenda, and so I think it was shortly after that. Now I'll get back to you about who this person was. I can't remember his name. French, someone associated with the Club of Rome. that he came to the United States and, you know, maneuvered things to
I'm just
pull the
wondering if
plug on.
it related to the dollar depegging from gold at all, if that was
Sure,
like
yeah, I'm
current
sure.
going on. And De Gaulle kind of forcing the issue, right? De Gaulle forcing the issue, saying he was going to do a run on America's gold supply, kind of announcing it publicly. That's interesting.
And right, and how many times did they try to kill de Gaulle?
Yeah, a
How many
lot.
assassins?
The Jackal,
It's
right?
almost, it's almost comic. Yeah, yeah, great film.
Not
It's
quite,
almost comic.
not quite. What's his name? Castro. Man, if half of what they say is true, just half of that they tried to kill Castro that many times. It's like, man, the CIA starts to look pretty incompetent. That they tried to kill him. I want to say like 300 plus times. They tried to kill Castro. They did things like they had pretty seashells on the beach that had plastic explosive because they knew he had a girlfriend that would collect seashells, and so she went running getting for it, and they accidentally blow it up too soon and blow up his girlfriend. A lot of Castro's girlfriends didn't make it in the hail of CIA bullets, like literal or metaphorical. They had literal exploding cigars, like not like Looney Tunes exploding cigars. They literally tried to blow up Castro with exploding. I mean, it was comical. It's just comical is the perfect word for it. So Castro, they tried to kill even more than De Gaulle, but they, for a right-wing politician like De Gaulle, a nationalist, it's rather unusual, at least in Europe, for these kind of like blatant assassination attempts.
Well, you see, you said the word nationalist. It was because he was a nationalist,
Right.
because he was a reasonable man, because he was a real man. He was a real man. He was strong. He was honest. He was incredibly brave, and
Yeah,
he was willing to listen to Kennedy about Algeria. And you know, there's an anecdote about him from World War II. I don't know. I don't remember the specifics, but he was on somewhere in the war theater, and he was walking with his men, you know, and there was a bomb. A shell comes in, explodes, and everybody hits the ground except de Gaulle, and he stands there and he says, "Gentlemen, behave yourselves."
no weapon formed against me shall prosper. Well, that seems I know there's lots more to go over. We'll just have to do a future show. We'll have to do a recorded one. But as this is the live Q&A, if you don't mind, I'd like to switch it over to do Q&A. And actually, you're up first because there was a question.
Can I? Yeah, sorry. If so I'm saying I was trying to get this trajectory that all of these, to me, concerted attacks on America because of what America represents, going back to the original impulses behind the Constitution. But then I found this article about Switzerland. There was a Nazi. This is now from the mid 80s. Gaston Guy Amardrouz, often tagged as the head of the Nazi International, which I'm studying now. There is a Nazi International.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And he says, look, first of all, he says, there is no split between left and right wing. The system is a dictatorship of the center. It is very important to have the extremes working together to bring down the system. And then he says, America is the world's main problem, the main obstacle to peace. The white man should never have gone to America. The white race should have stayed in Europe. They repressed the American Indians there. It was a brutal experience. America is the main threat to the world. The peace movement's resistance against the United States is perfectly justified. And then he says, the collapse will come. This is from 1983. And elsewhere, I'll stop there, but I'm just saying I'm beginning to see these.
What was that guy's name, real quick?
Guy Gaston Amardrouz, Amaudruz, Gaston Guy Amardrouz, and he worked with.
Email, please, because I want to.
Yeah.
This guy more.
So I found very obvious, explicit threats. And remember last time on the live stream, I was talking about Prince Johannes von Thurn and Taxis, and he would make these statements like, oh, you know, the United States could be annihilated tomorrow and I would still be fine. I'm the richest man in the world and we are the Inquisition. And he's insert these little, he was known for making death threats against people all the time, and people couldn't tell when he was serious or not. But, you know, at that time, he was the richest man, and he had huge influence in Washington. And he would make these sorts of insinuating statements. So I'm seeing this emerge from this time, the rumblings, the discontent, the hatred of America. And now Americans don't even know who they are anymore. So, but I will leave it there. There's a lot more to get into, and we will. I apologize to people if I seem to be rambling or all over the place. It is like herding cats. And I am very action oriented, like Ian is. It's about making a difference, about getting things done, and that's my #1 interest. And it's I'll leave it there.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to give you the first question because it's the one that I couldn't answer a while back. Let's see. So this is one of the first questions way back, and Param Sharma said, what families are at the top of the black nobility? And so I just rattled off, not necessarily having a hierarchy, the Orsinis, right, with Pepe Orsini, the Great Pope, the Massimo family because they run the mafia, and then Pallavicini, as I mentioned, and I forgot the name of the family that runs the BIS, but you know this much better than I.
Yeah, that's the family, the Torlonia family. They were the bankers to the Pope. And they apparently run.
I had an answer. I'll be right back. Continue.
Yeah, they apparently run the Federal Reserve. That was what I heard. Torlonia family. They're supervisors of the. They oversee the Bank for International Settlements in Basel, and it's interesting because their name Torlonia means lone tower. And if you see the BIS in Basel, it's constructed like a tower, and it actually is a sovereign entity. It has its own police force. It's kind of like a little tiny, like as powerful as sovereign as the Vatican. But certainly the Pallavicini family, incredibly powerful and also very influential in the Muslim world. There's a lot of ties with the Muslim world. Switzerland apparently is perhaps has the most per capita number of converts to Islam is in Switzerland. So they have no problem with Islam. Let's put it that way. And I have a problem with religion in general, but one thing to keep in mind is that perhaps the reason why you're seeing this sort of forced migration of Muslim populations into Europe is because all the royal families, the noble families, have Arab ancestry, have some blood in them, and that's one of the reasons. But yeah, there's for instance, behind this push to regenerate the Holy Roman Empire, you have the House of Liechtenstein, you have the well, of course, the House of Orange, Nassau. These are not black nobility; these are northern tier. But I had wanted to say this: the House of Hohenzollern. They're also involved in the complicated restoration efforts that include the British, to whose royal family Prince Ferdinand is closely related, the Wittelsbach of Bavaria and their advisors, and the Soviets. The House of Hanover, the House of Guelph, who was connected with the House of Guelph, the House of Wittelsbach, advised by the Thurn and Taxis, the Hohenlohe, and other mediatized princes of the Holy Roman Empire. The Wittelsbachs were instrumental in creating the Bavarian Nazi Party, and there's a lot to go into on the Bavarian Nazi Party and how Otto von Habsburg was, in a sense, by becoming a Bavarian politician, was going to use Bavaria as sort of a megaphone for his larger project. The House of Württemberg, head of Royal House Duke Karl of Württemberg, may join Bavaria to a restored Holy Roman Empire. So then, yeah, the house, there's a lot of videos that give you a rundown. The House of Aldobrandini, Chigi family.
Aldobrandini, another really important one that I often forget. Yep. Yeah. So,
and
Oh, go ahead.
And the one that we don't talk about.
I'm curious. I have mentioned all the really big ones that I could think of, so now I'm curious.
The one that's supposedly at the top is the House of Massimo.
Oh, okay, yeah, I did say that they ran all the world's mafias, so yeah.
And just for the questioner there, I had on one of our last shows, Ian, someone had asked about the House of Massimo, and Ian texted me and said, "Could you please answer this question in the comment section?" And I saw it, and I said, "Oh, I fleshed out a little more information about the House of Massimo," and my comment disappeared within 10 seconds.
Yeah.
And I thought maybe something's wrong with the Wi-Fi here. You know, I'll do it again. I wrote it all out again. I added some more things. Said it went through. It went up there, and then 15 seconds later, it was gone.
And you know, the algorithm deletes comments. So I rarely comments. Like the only times I delete comments are when someone is hateful to some like individual or group other than me, including guests. If someone is like just empty criticism, just like, you know, thanks for your 2 cents from the peanut gallery, like that left instead, kind of really just they're just trying to get a rise out of me, you know, or whatever. I'll delete stuff like that just seems like clickbait. If someone wants to strongly disagree with me on something I'm saying on the show, and that I don't enjoy it, of course, but sometimes I do, because sometimes like some really amazing avenues open up when people are in disagreement about whatever details. So there's lots of, especially on the first Black Nobility, there's a lot of threads where people disagree with me and I vehemently disagree with them, and it goes back and forth. I don't delete comments, but boy, the algorithm sure does, and it loves to delete awesome comments. Like, I'll get a really amazing comment, and speaking of awesome comments, this is like the nicest comment that anyone's put up in a long time. But the comments like this one from Hom here, Hom actually has had a great comment. This is a person whose comment was deleted by the algorithm at one point. I it was a similar comment kind of like this that was really friendly, and I was so touched, and I was going to heart it and respond and like have a heartfelt response because it was so heartfelt and awesome like that. And no, the algorithm deleted it. And meanwhile, there's these comments, Ian talks too much. Oh, well, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, no, I know, I do talk too much, for sure.
Who says? I totally disagree with that. You should talk more and more and more.
I get it.
Come on.
Since I was
well,
that I clearly need to work through. It's a sensitive spot for me, and so, you know, people put up these nice comments, you know, and the darn algorithm will delete them sometimes. It seems like it picks on nice comments and also informative ones. I will say your comments of this particular one are somewhat unique in that I didn't even get a message that you had commented, and then it wasn't there. I got no message that you had commented at all. You know, no.
Yeah, I think it's very possible because from what I understand, some of these families have gang stalkers and hackers who like comb the internet looking for comments to delete. So it might not have been the algorithm. It might have been an actual person, which of course makes me feel really nice.
Yeah.
Knowing that, but it's very likely.
So there's a couple of more questions, like by some folks who've gotten quite a few questions in already, who were early in the chat. And in the interest of time, I want to get to some of these. So Rick and Tank, I'll answer some of your questions. Also, Tank's like going on a very interesting tangent about something to do with the 3 Abrahamic faiths are all like sort of mind control programs from the get-go. And I think there's definitely a grain of truth. And like I said, Tank, I'll discuss that more. Rick had the
very important observation.
The families, how could they not feel bad? And I discussed it earlier. So the next one is then, is there an actual family that the Rockefellers were led by, and are there any ties to them with the Black Nobility? Yeah, I mean, I've heard that the Rothschilds run the Rockefellers. Next sort of layer of the onion, if you will. Do you know who the Rothschilds answer to? I know they answer to someone. I'm not clear.
They answer to, well, for one thing, they answer to the House of Habsburg.
Okay.
Because they're hired by, they work for them. They're like, imagine having your own accountant. That's what they are. They answer to the House of Hesse, who gave them their boost up in the world. People have to understand that the Rothschilds are piddling compared to some of these families. The Torlonia family, their family's much wealthier, much more powerful. They just like to hide themselves.
Yeah.
And they like to push the court Jews to the front to take the heat, and this is an example of that.
How does it make any sense, folks, that a conspiracy has existed for hundreds or thousands of years, and yet very obviously all the frontmen and key positions of corporations are all that same group? Don't you think if it was the Jews that there wouldn't be Jewish guys in the front, right? There wouldn't be Larry Fink at BlackRock, there wouldn't be Janet Yellen, all these kind of people who are in key positions, but let's be honest, they're really window dressing positions because the real stuff's happening behind the curtain. So all the people that are at the spotlighted at the seeming center of power, but they're never the shareholders, right? They're always the CEOs or whatever, literally in this case I'm talking about. That how could that be the group that's running things? They would have to be awfully dumb that they would put themselves in the crosshairs that way. And that implies that they wouldn't last very long. And these families that Philip and I are talking about, many of them have, roots that go back even thousands, plural, thousands of years, in some cases back to the ancient Near Eastern cultures in Babylon and Acadia and probably Sumeria, although I haven't run that down, but I've traced them back to at least Acadia through the Syrian lines. And so these families are deep-pocketed ancient money. They're not old money, they're ancient money, like unfathomably ancient, unfathomably wealthy. And that's what the entire point of the series is in a lot of ways, is to dispel the notions of that it's nation states or it's some guy who you visibly see at the Bank of International Settlements like Augustine Carstens. That's not where the buck stops. It's where the Happy Meal stops. So let's be real. And any other food within arm's length of that guy, I will fat shame corrupt bastard like Augustine Carstens. So obviously guys like that are not where the buck stops. It's not prime minister, it's not senators, and it's not CEOs of corporations. Get real. So it's not
even Klaus Schwab.
Right, exactly.
He's probably being run by Charles III.
That seems very plausible to me and like very likely. And see, that's what everyone needs to realize. They have their little mouthpiece people. Like I can't verify what Philip just said. It has the ring of truth for what it's worth, and it makes perfect sense because everything Charles has said forever and ever comes out of Schwab's mouth the past 20-something years with a bit more technocratic nightmare thanks to Yuval Harari. But Charles running Schwab is like a great example. They have their little frontmen, and they all know who their frontmen are. They all know, and like, I'm curious who runs Soros, right? Because obviously whoever runs Soros is a very nasty, a very nasty person.
It could very well be Charles III.
Really? That's interesting.
I think he's mostly British controlled.
Really?
To me, he smacks of British. And that would put, that's what I suspect.
Sachs, Coburg, and Gotha. So, anyways, so the Rockefellers are run by the Rothschilds, and then we went several layers deeper in the onion on that because at the end of the day, I'm not in any way dispelling the obvious. There's a lot of Ashkenazi Jews in a lot of positions of power, and some of them really matter, like the Rothschilds and Warburgs and some of these other. I forget what it is, Gold or whatever, Goldman, something like that, that married into the line of Charles III, actually. So there's
what about, I'm sorry to interject, this idea that these so-called Jews are not really Jews, that they're this Babylonian Radhanite.
Oh, the Radhanites, yeah. So the Radhanites are never, they're less than they're less than the Khazarian, like they're even more fake. Like they literally intentionally faked it. The Khazarians genuinely took it on because they didn't want to get killed by the Muslims and Christians. So in a way, they faithfully converted. The Rodenites, it's completely different. They wore it as a mask from the get-go. Like, they're Babylonian and they're freaking Moloch worshippers, of course. And that's part of where the confusion comes in, is these Roddenite supposed Jews. Like, that was one of the things when I discovered that they were completely fake and that they were from Babylon region. Like, it's just branches, or they retreated back there after Alexander. It's those same it's that same nobility, Near Eastern nobility, in that same region of the world. And so, and Babylon's particularly important. So let's get to the next one. Simply Lucid.
But isn't it interesting? And I've done this experiment on social media. People are so in love with their hatred of Jews that when you try to say, hey, I know you've hated Jews for a long time, but did you know this? Do you know who's really behind it? Were you aware of the House of Hesse? Do you know how much power they have? Are you aware of the history of this? They get really angry.
Yeah.
You know, you would think that they would say, "Oh, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that." But they're not even receptive to the idea, you know. Yeah. And then they start accusing me of being a Zionist, and
I've gotten it a million times. I can get in the comment sections someone who's Jewish or sympathetic of Israel or whatever, protective of Jewish people. You know, I have Jewish members of my family, as I often talk about, you know, and they come in and start saying I'm anti-Semitic for what I say. And then in the same freaking comment, the video, there'll be someone, I usually delete these because they're very often turned into just a spew of hate, which I don't allow. Look, we can talk honestly about things like the Rothschild family or whatever. We don't need to then get crazy anti-Semitic, which is nonsense, and exactly what Philip and I are talking about. But right below the person who says I'm hate Jewish people, someone will say that I'm a traitor to non-Jewish people and leading them to the slaughter and whatever kind of nonsense. And the thing is like, I had someone just do it again to me very, very recently, the anti-Jewish thing. There always is such an emotional edge to it, and that's why I'm convinced that there's this existence, an intentionally created magical egregore of anti-Semitism. Because
absolutely,
egregore is to overwhelm with usually pathos, emotion, right? That's why when the Raiders egregore and the 49ers egregore come together, you know, it's like flashing, and it takes place then on the battlefield of the football. What do you call it? Football field. Sorry, I blanked for a second. And then you see the waves of emotion move through the crowd, and it's a similar thing here with this anti-Semitism, in my opinion. But I do want to get to some more questions here. So
let's do it.
Simply Lucid said, question, is resonating with Luciferianism a bad thing? Well, no. I mean, so it doesn't resonate for me, meaning that I have explored that being's offerings and what they are. And that being is pretty clear to me, a false light that leads you deeper into delusion based on narcissism, and like a false self-love, which is being selfish and being narcissistic. A true self-love, if it's really true, it'll eventually penetrate so deep that it becomes love for everything. I think that resonating with Luciferianism is actually an ethical thing compared to Malachianism. You're stepping way the heck up in ethics. You're stepping way the heck up in morals. You're stepping up in spiritual vibration. So no, it's not bad. And it's honestly, that means that you're ahead of the curve, that you're moving in the direction to where the planet's going to be in general. Do I think that one should aspire to worshiping Lucifer? No. I think that that's going to be pushed a lot once the Luciferians win. They won't be like the Malachians in the shadows. They'll take full credit. The Malachians are trying to kind of roll out their stuff in the public now that they've been exposed, but it just looks as clunky and shitty as, well, look at this dumpster fire of virality we have, as the Malachians are like, okay, we're going to announce our presence to the world, and they're like, blah, blah, blah. You know, they come out just looking batshit insane because they fucking are batshit insane. They're absolutely crazy, these people. They're have a fingernail grip on reality at best. They're completely like they're not just egotistical, but their ego's like all it's got cancer running through it. It's just completely insane. There's no refinement whatsoever, like you find with Luciferians.
Because it seems to thrive on sadism. And when I think when you deny the feelings of other people, you become warped, and then you have to justify it on top of that.
Absolutely.
Kind of monstrosity develops.
And so I think that that's I think that that's well put. So I'm just gonna real quick, Tank. Tank and Rick, you guys answer some more questions. I'm gonna jump into them a little bit later. I just want to get to people who haven't had questions answered yet, and then we'll come back. So Ryan said, "Well, I wish I could." Oh yeah, well, much love to you too, Ryan. And yeah, when you get home from work tonight, enjoy, and nice to see you. So some more from Rick. Oh, then Holm asked a question. Great. What type of occultism is the Vatican into? Is it purely Malachian? I would say that the general ethos or vibration in the Vatican, though even in the Vatican, there are people I would say that are Luciferian and even Most High oriented. The power structure of the Vatican is utterly dominated by the Malachians. What occultism? Well, they've stolen techniques from all over the world. If you mean like what occult practices do they do? The Jesuits very famously do hatha yoga and a variety of other esoteric and occult techniques. So
really,
they're not limited by some sort of cultural thing of that it has to have originated in the Near East.
Right. Yeah, of course.
They'll take whatever works for them. If you mean ethos or vibration, then yes, it's maybe not purely Malachian, but pretty close. Like the Vatican is one of the 3 ultra hotspots for it, along with the City of London and to a much lesser degree, Washington, D.C., which is still, even now, as corrupt as it is far better than those other 2. So, well, let's see. So Truth Seeker makes pretty bold claim here. Are you aware that only a few million people out of almost 8 billion will survive and go into the next Yuga, the Sat Yuga? Kalki, the apocalyptic horse rider, will come after 2030 AD, ACC to me. Well, I will tell you that angels and other spirits did tell me that somewhere between hundreds of millions and billions of people will not be with us by 2030, and that the degree of whether it's just a few 100 million die an untimely death or billions that's where we have free will. And that's where like Lucifer and other earthbound deities and the angels are all working together and trying to do damage control and trying to prevent that worst case scenario to where like 7.5 billion out of 8 died. A few million is, I've never heard such a low number. The lowest number that's been, just for what it's worth, and also matches things like the Georgia Guidestones, if you want to believe in that, is the worst case scenario would be about 500 million. And that would be if like the Malachians had really done a lot of damage before they got out of there. That for some reason it took the Luciferians longer. The Malachians were able to pull more of the temple, so to speak, down around them like an angry Samson, but evil. And so the apocalyptic horse racer. So a few different people have asked about Kalki. Yeah, actually, I think there might be something to that. Is it Krishna's reincarnation, I believe? Sorry if I'm getting that detail wrong. I'm a bit tired right at the moment. But Kalki is a reincarnation of, could even be like the major spirits rather than like, but no, I think it's Krishna returning as Kalki, and because Krishna and Jesus, the similarity there. And so like Kalki comes back and on a horse and flies around and beheads all the heads of these evil kings that have taken over. So I do think something to that is true. I think that it's going to take place maybe more in symbolic form rather than a literal horse rider coming down, but rather something will sweep through rapidly and behead the evil kings. And that you could call that force that beheads the evil kings Kalki. But the participants are actors who play that out may actually be more like Luciferian regular folks, and that Kalki is more a movement that comes through the Luciferians to wipe out the Molochians. That's just my interpretation of how it would fit with what the angels have told me. And feel free to believe whatever you wish on that and take what resonates and leave the rest, but we'll go on to the next one. What is the origin of Moloch as an owl and Moloch as a bull? So Moloch as an owl is a female form. It's also crossed over with there's a number. There's more than one god that where the owl is used. Like Ishtar has like owl feet. Also, the goddess I don't even like to say her name, but Lilith also is like an owl, has an owl form. But there's Moloch as an owl as the female form, and Moloch as a bull is the male form. And then the amphibious Moloch is kind of the true form of Moloch, where it's both male and female at the same time and kind of also neither. And so the bull is just much more like rampaging destruction, open obliteration and destruction. And the Moloch as the owl is the hiding in the shadows aspect of, and this predator swooping down in the night silently and killing, and that's the female aspect of it. I mean, there's a lot more to it than that, but that's just kind of like a vague outline of why they're sometimes worshipped as an owl and sometimes as a bull. There's also occulted statues that you'll sometimes see, like that weird panther that they put out front of the UN is an occulted Moloch statue, and there's going to be more like that. It's just there's a lot of like inversion of natural law stuff. If you look at that weird like displacer beast, like tentacled cheetah or whatever the hell it is that's out front of the UN, like they're not quite bold enough yet to roll out Moloch statues. That may actually happen. They're getting more and more bold, and they're also like a bit like if you've seen Blue Velvet and what's his name, that one incredible actor, so terrifying, Dennis Hopper, and he's like huffing the ether rag and he's totally insane. Like they're at that level. That's where they're at right now. They're huffing the ether. They don't realize that they aren't actually in control anymore, but they think they are because they're just drunk with power and 6,000 years of inbred madness and epigenetic trauma that has reached like a black hole level of density in some of these families. And so they may very well roll out the owl or the bull before this is said and done. I was told they would start putting out statues, and then when I saw that UN one, I recognized it as one of those statues. But I've been told they will literally roll out actual like straight up bull and owl statues. We'll see if that happens. These guys are pretty drunk on power. I mean, look at this Dylan Mulvaney nonsense. Like it's kind of crazy what is being pushed out there at this point.
Yeah, you know, it's if I could just interject one little thing. You said the phrase drunk on power. I think for these sort of, I would call it like nouveau riche power people, like Rockefellers, Rothschilds, Klaus Schwab, Bill Gates, these piddling people who are held up to at least have, these people think they're authorities. They do get even, I think, more intoxicated. They can't handle it. The older aristocratic families, they've been doing it for, as in some cases, thousands of years. So it's more an integrated part of who they are. They begin they're trained from the time they're born, you know, into this life. But these nouveau riche types, you know, they become, I think, like loose cannons. Correct. What do you think of this? What I'm saying?
I mean, I think it's happening at all the levels on the Molochian side. I think they're falling apart, and that it's you know, Moloch, it still can touch the world pretty much full on, but it's loosening, and like Moloch's being more insistent and trying to dominate and trying to control, and the way that desperate attempt to hold on to the levers of power, it's manifesting in people literally doing that and then cracking under the psychic pressure of this Molochian energy and the madness of it. I think they're just literally cracking under the pressure of it, and it's part of what's going to make them fail. They don't see how far they've lost things already. Because remember, the most important thing at the end of the day is the narrative. It doesn't seem like it, but it absolutely 110% is. And they have completely lost control of the narrative. And I see the Luciferians ginning up and stirring up a bunch of stuff about the banking, a bunch of like information about the banks is out there that in a way I've never seen in my life. And people are pretty unified around that, talking about like the really big banks, the central banks, and like BlackRock and stuff like that. I mean, the protesters in France, that was astonishing to me. They went into BlackRock. So there's the awareness around that, the awareness around the Epstein thing. The Epstein thing just won't go away. It just won't go away. And the whole pedogate phenomenon and all its tentacles, it's like whack-a-mole for the Malakians, and they can't keep it down. And it's reaching a level of consciousness that it's really out of control and obvious. And also like the C word, where Biden just ended the pandemic, right? That now like all that information is coming out, and that like it's more and more very sober adults in the room kind of people. Obviously, I would call them the slow kids, but people who are in positions of authority and for whatever reason didn't act, whatever. Maybe they're Luciferian, who knows what their agenda is, talking about like the sort of later to the game people who are coming there. Like there's that one bald doctor in England who I think he's sincere. It just took him a long time to realize this whole scam. But people like that are coming around and seeing it. And the elephant in the room isn't even the killing anymore, or the deaths anymore. The elephant in the room is fast becoming, this was not an accident. And the implications of that. And what I mean is, the very sober, very methodical, very indoctrinated, let's be honest, experts, right? And I'm not talking about the ones who are completely unethical trash, but the people who sincerely went along with it at first and then started to have questions, and at some point, perhaps kind of late, started speaking up about this. Like, they're all of a sudden, it's dawning on them, boy, this sure looks intentional. And the reason that that's dawning on them is there's an orgy of evidence out there pointing to this. And the Luciferians have made it readily available, because I am telling you, their plan is that when certain conditions are met, they're going to very quickly run the table on these Malakians. They're going to drag them out of their tombs, their whatever, and they're going to try them publicly in what will more than likely be a kangaroo court, completely predetermined court. Hence why there's all this chatter of Nuremberg 2.0, because the first Nuremberg was a kangaroo court. And so this one certainly will be. That said, them hanging a bunch of pedo Satanists from the neck, Malakians from the neck, I'm not gonna not maybe cheer for that a little bit, even if I know that it's bad people are also not the best people are taking over the Luciferians. It's pretty sell to say that the old guard needs to go and that these new technocrats need to take over. But they're going to be kinder, gentler technocrats. We're not scary and crazy like the Great Reset people, but we will need a digital ID and a pervasive surveillance system. We will need X, Y, and Z thing. But then also when they have those things, that kind of surveillance and extreme potential for control, that'll be a light touch under the Luciferian system, that is required to roll out the higher technology stuff, because it's simply too dangerous to roll this stuff out when people there isn't the potential to very quickly react to people and get under control if people use some of this ultra high technology, especially the anti-gravity stuff. It apparently has some kind of reality warping effect. And so it's just too dangerous. You need to have hyper controls around it. So they're going to require certain things that we don't like. And that's why there's this dance of, it seems like this terrible technocratic system is being birthed in front of us. But also, if you also look, this really interesting technocratic high-tech civilization is also being birthed right now in front of us. You can actually, if you look, you can see both versions manifesting. And the question is which system's going to win? It's going to be the Luciferian one. That's what I firmly believe. So simply Lucifer. Question, do you work with psychedelics at all for mystical pursuits? So I have in the past. I do not use psychedelics currently, and have not for many, 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 many years. I do not judge others who do it. I would say that Most of the time when I did it, it was in a spiritual context. Not always. There was times I did certain things like in a partying context in my 20s, but most of the time, mostly because it had such a profoundly spiritual impact on me, when I would do psychedelics, I would do it in a very spiritual context, and where possible, like under the guidance of a shaman or someone who is a trained guide. I think that psychedelics have tremendous potential for good and tremendous potential for evil. Look no further than the MK Ultra experiments for how it can be used for evil. But at this point, a ton of people in the US, and I actually plan to have this one woman on who's a big advocate for it, who I find to be ethical. There's definitely like shamans and so forth who do ayahuasca ceremonies, and it's life-changing for people. I know people whose life has been completely changed by using, in particular, 5-MeO DMT from the Sonoran Desert toad, things like that. So the thing is that psychedelics super open you up spiritually and mystically, and that it also lights you up in the astral realm, and that can attract to you astral parasites. You know, we're in a low ebb of consciousness, so the astral space near us here in late Kali Yuga is chock full of astral parasites and demonic influences and all kinds of stuff. And so if you aren't working with someone who can help you, that doesn't happen every time. It's just simply a risk, okay? But part of the reason people have bad trips is because of spirits. That does happen at times. A trickster spirit, there's spirits that like to upset people and harvest the emotional energy off that, and that's how they survive. And so psychedelics can be a really powerful and wonderful tool, but they also can be used for very dark purposes like MK Ultra, and they also, if they're used in a poor circumstance, if you're just around the wrong people, it can be a really psychologically devastating experience. And so I have, yes, I think it can be really amazing for people, especially who maybe have had no real mystical experiences and they question whether there's a spiritual reality. There's certain psychedelics that can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that these spiritual realms exist. It's ridiculous to me that there's scientists, and most of the scientists who studied psychedelics come away with, okay, clearly there's some more stuff going on out here in the universe other than just physics. Like, those machine elves were pretty convincing, blah, 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 whatever. I interacted with reptilians when I smoked DMT. Whatever it might be, people come away from it and they go, yeah, maybe there is a little something, something out there going on out there. So it can be an eye-opener, but it can also become a crutch for people where they think they have to sit with medicine, and what they really need to do is work on their shadow and do healing of their trauma. So it can be a very powerful tool, but it can also be a dead end and a trap. So
can I chime in? Can I chime in there with my own?
Mm-hmm.
Can I say something?
Mm-hmm.
Are you moving on to another question?
No, go ahead. I mean, I was going to. But
okay. I just want to say, you know, back in the mid '80s, there was this new drug. It was called Adam, and it was pushed in California among the New Age movement.
Mm-hmm.
And psychology through Esalen, etc. And it was Adam, and it was something you could find a therapist who would give it to you, and supposedly it was going to help you really attain complete love for the universe and open yourself up. It's going to solve all the emotional problems in the world. And I had a girlfriend at the time, and we had this therapist, and we would, like you know, do it at a spiritual setting, go to the beach, do it in a very controlled, spiritual, supposedly measured way. And then I ran into a friend, and he used to go to parties and clubs, and he was talking about a drug that he was doing at clubs, and he described what happens on this drug. And I said, wow, that sounds a lot like Adam. But they were calling it ecstasy. Of course, everybody knows what ecstasy was, what it is, and the scourge that it presents, and it's physically very hard on you. And I also did experimented with LSD and mushrooms and stuff, and I would just say, for me, it's just my opinion. I don't need to be. I don't believe in anything I mean, in the sense that the physical universe is, so-called physical universe, is a tremendous mystery to me. I don't let anybody tell me what it is. I don't have an empiricist view of it, and I'm open to anything if I feel it. As I said at the beginning of this, my section here was acknowledging that Ian has opened me up to other dimensions, and it just feels so much more real than having to take a substance to attain that. And I feel that I think it's really important. I think you can do it on your own. You can find a way, and if you can't, then overcome those obstacles, a little bit every day.
Mm-hmm.
I'm somebody who, I can't worship anything. I can't believe in anything. I live as if everything is a complete mystery to me, and I enjoy when I can tap into something that's new. And so that's what's so great about this channel. So that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. So I'm just going to scroll down a little bit further, and there's a question from Hall I might answer, but I want to see if there's anyone new that I haven't answered a question. Okay, so Ingrid S. And I'll get back to those other ones if I can here. So, hi, thanks for the Q&A. Do these people identify as Luciferians, Molochians, or are these terms purely descriptive? Well, so that's a great question. I often try and answer this. There's a number of levels to this. There's sort of a psychological level of where people are sort of at a certain level of like ethical growth, so to speak, moral growth, with no growth represented by, or stunted growth more accurately, tremendously stunted growth would represent the Molochian level, psychological level. And then a more advanced would be the Luciferian, like sort of psychological level. And the most advanced, which would represent the highest ideals of humanity and philosophy and so forth, which you can see in various different philosophers and spiritual systems, would be that most high impulse. That is one way of looking at it. Okay, so then there's also the vibrational level, that people vibrate at a certain frequency based on their day-to-day habits and their thoughts. And thoughts become habits, and there's interplay between your thoughts and your emotions and your habits and what you actually do in the physical world. And so on that level, the vibrational level, there's also the Moloch is the lowest, right? And it leads to certain action outcomes, right? Like pedophilia is limited to the Molochian sphere. That's the only group that does that. It's a calling card. When you see it, like we just did with the Dalai Lama, when you see it indisputably like that, that is, to me, just my opinion, unassailable evidence that that person is a Molochian. So now you ask, do they identify this way? Some of them do, many of them do not. At the very highest levels of the pinnacles of power, I am of the belief that at the very top on both factions are people who absolutely worship Moloch and Lucifer intentionally, consistently, commune with that deity, get instructions from that deity, and play out that deity's will and agenda here on earth. Absolutely. The same way there's people who worship the Most High very openly, right? Like true Christians, right? Now, there's also people who think they worship the Most High, but their actions speak that they're more aligned with Luciferianism, or even sometimes Molochianism. It does happen. People outwardly go to church or whatever, but then they're a pedophile, right? And so that's more like a outward face versus what you actually do, your vibrational, right? And so people at the very highest levels of the pinnacles of power of all these groups, including people who are in the secret esoteric groups that are worship the Most High and are aligned with that vibration and that deity, they do worship that deity. But the majority of people at the administrative level, where it kind of matters for your life, I would not say that they worship Lucifer or Moloch. They simply behave in that way. It's their level of consciousness. And that extends all the way up. And there's people who are at the lowest levels of power who openly worship Moloch, Satanists, right? Poor Satanists. You've seen them at the bus stops. The Satanist kid with the Satanist, jean jacket and Satan logo on the back, and they're so cool. And They openly are satanic, but they're obviously not pulling the strings, the puppet strings of the world. And there's poor people who are homeless who worship the Most High, and there's poor people who talk to Lucifer. And there's people at every strata of society that fit into these molds. That said, as a general rule, where power becomes more concentrated, those people are primarily Malachians, although that is shifting towards primarily Luciferians, and also a greater share of the power pie is also going to move to people who are in the Most High. And people who are in the Most High, let me tell you, the Luciferians, you can reason with them. They will allow you to worship your God. They're going to try and corrupt you at every turn. They're going to try and get you to worship Lucifer at every turn. They're going to lie and cheat, where they can. But the Malachians will kill you and your family, period. They want to kill us all. They want to wipe us all out. And most all humans, period. Like, they're very into depopulation and Malthusian madness. And these are not people who can be reasoned with. These are not people that you give an inch to. They must be stopped at all costs. And the key to beating them is to find and ally ourselves with people who are more in this. If you can find politicians who are in the Most High and they don't get a sniper bullet in the head in the first week, which often happens, then great, by all means support that. And also tell me on the channel who are politicians who are actually aligned with the Most High. I'd love to hear it, because pretty much all I see are Malachians and Luciferians, with rare exceptions like the King of Jordan is Most High aligned. The royal families, the families that run Bhutan, seem to be Most High aligned. But I mean, these are corner at best. And the Bhutan thing is said somewhat out of ignorance, or a lot out of ignorance, to be honest. Whereas the King of Jordan thing, I'm pretty solid on. What were you going to say?
I was going to say that I noticed the same. I think Karl von Habsburg is on a higher level. He's never been implicated in any. It's hard, in terms of the research I've done into the activities of the royal and noble families today. He's never been implicated in any of these very dark activities.
Mm-hmm.
And I sense an organic, sincere, basic goodness in him that differentiates him. So I would include him in that group, definitely. I would also say that, well, I would suggest that when people proclaim that they follow or worship a certain thing or belong to a group, these are underlings, because the groups, these cults, are set up by people who, they're not necessarily people who actually believe in it. They just know that they know how to set up cults, and then they know how to control people through through having set up and running those cults.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to wrap up, this is a series of questions, and I had them all flash up at the bottom of the screen there. Here, I'll just put the second thing as, or them being referred to Satanists by survivors, A. Lucas, other SRA victims. So it's not clear what they identify as. She said there was supposedly bloodline members referring themselves as Luciferians. Yeah, there definitely are. I think that you'll be more likely to find people who would refer to themselves as Luciferian than Malachian. They would probably just say Satanist. Malachian is a term I use because it seems to me that that's the deity that, based on the Bible and everything else, matches it. Do they use that term? They probably say Baal. In worship, they probably say Baal more than likely, because that's the actual name of that deity. Now, I intentionally do not use the term Haman Baal, which is the formal name of this deity, according to the Canaanites themselves. I use the term Moloch, which was the name the Jews gave it to. And it's a name that's infused with scorn and disgust and hatred and fear. All of those are embedded in the name Moloch, if you just let it rattle around in your skull a little bit. Whereas when you hear that the name Haman Baal, it has almost no charge whatsoever. That's dangerous, because we're talking about, in my opinion, the most dangerous deity on earth by far, and you need to identify it correctly. And the Jews were fighting this deity in ancient times. And when Yahweh Jehovah, by the way, I believe Yahweh Jehovah is basically an avatar of Mars. Just as Moloch is, another way of looking at Moloch is the lower aspect of Saturn. So Yahweh Jehovah, very warlike. Aries, very martial, like the Jews have like the ram's horn. They arose in the age of Aries, astrologically speaking. So they're very associated with it. The scapegoat also, like that same, there's like a lot of stuff that is surrounding it. But so you ask finally, like, what's the significance? Is it more religious devotional? Some of them. Practical, useful for blackmail ops. Yeah, that is what the Epstein thing is about, is that's for blackmail ops. But it is also initiate those people into that current in a very specific way, which means that spirit can act through them in a very specific way. That's another thing I should explain to people when they talk about the ancient, certain ancient writings are described as being in the bicameral mind. And what that means is that some writings of the ancient Greeks, they would say things like this. They would say, I gazed upon the maiden fair, right? Obviously translated in English. I gazed upon the maiden fair, and her supple bosoms and hips spoke to me, and Venus overtook me. And so I advanced upon her and caressed her hand and asked her name that I might bed her, right? Like overcome by love. But Venus acted through me. They would literally say this, Aphrodite, I guess the Greeks would say, Aphrodite acted through me, for I felt love, right? Or if they just wanted to get it on, they might say, Mars acted through me, and I didn't try and romance this girl. I tried to see if she was ready to go, right? That would be Mars acting through, Aries acted through me. It's funny because I'm an Aries, and Aries often acts through me in just such a way. So they would also say, like, when you are... when Aries acted through me, this guy insulted me, and Aries overtook me, and I pummeled him to the ground. But they would write very much, they would say, like, the movement of some god or spirit moved through them, and they witnessed it, and it was part of their experience that they would at times have lucidity and control, and at other times these spirits or gods would act through them. Now, the Hindus describe in the Vedic literature from which I do Vedic astrology, they describe the planets as Graha is their word, Graha, that's transliterated. And Graha means literally Caesar, the one who seizes and controls. And they say quite clearly in the text that when you act with unnecessary harshness and coldness and austerity, like in a very harsh way, that Shani or Saturn has seized you. And where Shani or Saturn is in your chart causes you to act in a certain way. So when you attune to that current of Moloch or the Most High in the angelic realms, right? This happens to me, that the angels will sort of act, the celestial current will act through me, and I will do an act of charity that I maybe wouldn't normally do. Likewise, when these people get involved in the Epstein stuff, that is allowing and inviting Moloch to operate through them, or Lucifer. And people can invite it in directly in a much more direct way than that. And that's why it's dangerous to do channeling. I do it rarely, and I pretty much only channel the angels. I experimented with it. I don't really do it anymore. I'm apparently super, super, super crazy good at it, but I pretty much don't do it anymore. I only do it for the angels, and only very rarely. Because when you invite a being into you, it can have really negative effects. And so these people are opening the door to that, not as intensely as channeling, but in a very significant way when they harm children like that. So you'll like this question, or maybe not, but it says, Truth Seeker says, Genghis Khan was a great man and the greatest conqueror of all time. Khazarians ran away to Europe due to fear of Mongols because some of them were still living there even after the Russian invasion. Do you agree? What do you think of that? I think.
Well, there was a variety. There were a variety of people. The steppe people or nomadic people, and you know, Genghis Khan was able to bring together, unite different tribes, and established a very progressive and enlightened union through his. You know, as a very young man, as a boy, he was betrayed by his own family, or his immediate, not his immediate family. His father had been killed by the Tatars, had been poisoned, and then he and his mother were basically abandoned as the tribe moved on, knowing that he was next, and that if he took his father's place, then they would not have the power that they saw the opportunity to have, and so they abandoned them, and the family really struggled to survive. It's very hard to survive on your own out there on the steppe if you don't have the community that you've always counted on to fulfill your needs. But they nevertheless survived, and he never forgot that. And as a result, he developed a higher mode of discernment that had to do with loyalty, and how people can have different belief systems. They can come from different places and have a different physiognomy, but they will be more loyal to you, and they're more valuable to you than those who are those of your tribe, and those with genetic similarities. And so, and then he also instigated freedom of religion.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, this was a big thing. You had under Genghis Khan, you had this huge debate between the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians. And the Buddhists. Everybody come, let's have a debate. Which religion is the best? And one of the participants said, you know, I've never been in a place where you wouldn't be put to death for articulating or expressing, you know, the precepts of another religion. This could only happen here. Only here in Mongolia have we been able to bring together people from these different cultures and said, hey, everybody's free to discuss and say whatever's on your mind, and let's really hash this out. So I'm not sure about, I have to apologize. I'm not quite sure about how to answer the specifics of this question.
It's okay. I mean, I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, for sure, like lots of waves of migration happened as ever fiercer people came rolling out of the steppes. And so, of course, Khazaria would have been right in the pathway of that. The Russians broke the back of Khazaria and made the Pale of the settlement, and like was there also like some amount of them that were pushed out by the Mongols at different points? Possibly. That was why they left Khazaria. It was because the Kiev Rus, it was that era of proto-Russia. Those guys broke the back of the Khazarian Khanate and made it like a little vassal state, basically, and said, if you guys keep doing nonsense, well, like, you guys need to stay in your Pale of the settlement. It's much like a Native American reservation, really.
Yeah, I would just say I could throw in one thing might be interesting.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of talk on the internet about Tartaria, or Grand Tartaria, or Tartary. And I think maybe it could be that there was some confusion, because the Mongols conquered the Tatars in response to a series of insults, rebukes, attacks. You know, finally the Mongols were just fed up with them, and Genghis Khan was finally able to get the revenge that he deserved. But then when the Mongols then invaded Russia, a lot of Russians were confused. They thought that the Mongols were Tatars because they were coming from that geographical direction, and so there might have been some confusion about that what we call Tartaria, where they were actually the Mongols. You had the same confusion in the Middle East as well, in around present-day Iraq, you know, Iran. That there was some confusion about were these Mongols or they were called Tatars. So I'm looking into that. That's a big subject. Very interesting, though.
So there's a lot of interesting comments here by Rick and Ingrid, and I just want to get to, I do need to wrap things up fairly soon, so I just want to try and get some of these folks who haven't gotten a question. Otherwise, thank you, Ingrid and Rick, so participatory, and your comments are really great and really heartfelt, especially like Rick talking about like some of the his difficulty in coming to grips with all the child harm stuff, which I certainly and I can agree with that. So Ryan Lone writes, is the Moloch Lucifer part taught in Freemasonry? Well, I honestly can't say. I'm not a Freemason. I don't suspect Freemasons can openly talk about that. I will tell you my independent research outside of Freemasonry. It seems that Freemasonry is a recruiting ground for higher level secret societies and mystery schools and so forth, and that actually all three, and even the hidden fourth faction, which I'm going to do a show on at some point, which is the non-dual faction in the that seems to emanate kind of from your neck of the woods, Philip, from the Tibetan plateau. Even that group will it's sort of like Masonry is one of the better portals to get into the mix of the spiritual politics going on this planet. I urge extreme caution, though, because I will say some of the best people I know in my life are Masons. They're good men. They just are, right? Like, I'm a Templar, and a lot of my Templar brothers are Masons. And some of my Templar brothers I don't like as much as others on just a personal level, and I'll leave it at that. And I question some of the things they do. But by and large, I really like all the Templars. And what I've heard from Masons who are Templars is that Templars are the, quote, cream of the crop of Masonry, by and large. And that's an interesting comment. And I will say that it seems that most of what I've been able to glean is that these different secret societies and mystery schools recruit from Freemasonry. And Freemasonry itself, I've seen apocryphal stuff that says that, and there's a lot of confusion about this figure because he happens to have the same name as another man who was very important at the time, also named Albert Pike. There's confusion about him. There were two Albert Pikes, actually. One of them was more involved in the KKK, and one of them's more a Masonic genius. And so there's some confusion that comes from that. I'm not sitting here defending Albert Pike, by the way. I'm also not attacking Albert Pike. I remain neutral. I need to do more research because he's one of those figures that's so polarizing that it's difficult to get facts that aren't very tainted. It's much like studying World War II. Almost all the facts around it are very tainted. There's two kind of competing narratives, and I suspect strongly both are very false. And so,
and there's a lot of really determined active measures taken to falsify history as we move forward. Absolutely. To manipulate. And they're serious. This is psychological. Yeah.
Into World War II marks as like a almost vertical movement upwards in historical revisionism. Some is reasonable, but that's mostly done by people on the ground and it's organic. But what you and I are talking about is like memory hole stuff. So what I was going to say, just to wrap up and answer Ryan's question here, there are apocryphal claims that Albert Pike said that at the heart of Freemasonry is Luciferianism. Now, that would make some amount of sense to me because it seems to me that Freemasonry is very Luciferian in character, meaning I'm talking about original Masonry, not super ultra corrupted Masonry, which is much more Malachian controlled. I'm talking about the Freemasonry that arose out of the original Templar. The original Templar led directly to Freemasonry. The original Templar basically went and hid amongst the master builders, among other places. And those master builders who made like the Gothic cathedrals and so forth, they would go on to later become what was called the Freemasons. That kind of guild, and a lot of the Templar secrets were folded into some of these guilds and so forth and hidden. And so in many ways, Freemasonry is an attempted revival of Templarism, but not completely. And it started out fairly pure when it came out in Scotland and became increasingly corrupted over time. There are still many, many, many good people, and I insist on this, who are Freemasons. Do I think that there's problems with Masonry as a whole? Well, obviously, there's a lot of documentation to back that up. Do I think that condemns all Masons? No, it shouldn't any more than do you really think 1.2 billion Catholics are bad? Well, no, obviously not. Well, would you not agree that the Vatican's pure evil? Well, of course. It's the same kind of thing, right? So yes, there are a lot of Freemasons who are very corrupt. I can say that because I'm not a Mason, which might prevent me from ever being able to join saying these kinds of things, but I just don't think I will in this lifetime. I have some kind of real hesitation around it, past life stuff. My family were Freemasons, though. I'm the first man in my family to not join, actually. But my father in no way pushed it on me, whereas it was kind of pushed on him. and had been for many generations. So I have somewhat of a 1 foot in, 1 foot out, which is pretty unusual. And I'm not bound the way Masons are bound, that you can't say certain things. You can't, like, I would never openly criticize a specific Templar brother. I mean, maybe if he did something so far beyond the pale and then like wasn't called to account and then like I, fell out or whatever, I wouldn't call out someone specific. It's just not respectful. If I had a problem with a fellow Templar, I would go and talk to him. And I do kind of like honor that. I haven't had such a problem, like there's a person I know who does things I don't agree with, but it's none of my business at the end of the day. It's not like they're harming someone, you know what I mean? Other than perhaps themselves by their choices. But I would never call this person out publicly, and it would be wrong to do so. But there's very specific rules about not doing exactly that among Masons, that you can't call out another Freemason. You're supposed to bring it into like their internal court system and deal with it there in private. So, there's definitely people who say, oh, it's all evil, blah, blah. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that there's not some real darkness that's come out of Masonry. And honest Masons will agree that they might undersell the degree of corruption that's come out of various lodges over the years. But I think you would be somewhat hard-pressed to find a remotely reasonable Mason who wouldn't say things like, well, yeah, the P2 lodge in Italy was totally corrupt. I mean, that's kind of their go-to of, yeah, but it's rare. I do find that most of my interactions with Masons, I find these people to be very, very, very ethical, actually, like massively so, and rules-oriented. I don't rub shoulders with the super high-ranking Masons who are really powerful, except for one. And I do know like a very powerful person in the Masonic world, and I love the guy. He has my utmost respect, and that's my Templar Grand Master Timothy Hogan, is extremely high regarded in the Masonic community, and I find this guy to be exemplary in his behavior, very humble and wonderful. And to me, the fruit tells me the tree, and in this case, like his fruit is good, what I've seen, and he seems to be good. I am aware that there are certainly bad Masons. So is Moloch Lucifer taught in Freemasonry? It's possible Lucifer is. I have had a high-ranking Mason tell me that. A very high-ranking Mason told me that, oh yeah, that stuff people say about Albert Pike, it's true. Like the highest levels do worship Lucifer. I had a guy tell me that. That particular guy, though, is one of the extremely rare Masons I've met to where that guy was super bad news. Super bad news. And in fact, he was kicked out of at least one order that I'm aware of because of his bad behavior. So take that with a grain of salt. Do I see it as falling under the Luciferian impulse? Yes, very much so. Same thing with Templarism. Templars do not worship Lucifer as far as I'm aware. And I would have to sit with that if I discovered that at the heart of my order such a thing was true. I'm not aware of that. It doesn't seem to have that. It has certain aspects of that higher sphere, the higher edge of the sphere of Luciferianism, lower end of the sphere of Most High, but it seems like generally very uplifting material. And so I'm not aware of that, but I'm pretty sure that Malachianism is not taught as part of Freemasonry. That said, clearly Malachian groups have corrupted Freemasonry over the centuries. This is well documented. There's a book called Proofs of a Conspiracy by John Robison, a contemporary of the Founding Fathers, and he was a high-ranking Freemason, and he talked about the corruption of all the Masonic temples. And I really think if you want to learn about Freemasonry, the best place to go is to read John Robison's Proofs of a Conspiracy. And he claimed that the Bavarian Illuminati was corrupting various different lodges. And there's a lot there's a lot of that around that period of time in Masonic lodges. And prior to that, Masons were very against slavery, for example. Not so much in the U.S. Masons, but Masons in continental Europe were very much behind the movement to end slavery. So I would love to give you a simple pat answer, but it turns out that this is a really deep question And Masonry is, to me, much murkier than Templarism, for example. So I want to move on to the next thing. Great conversation between Ingrid and Rick. So then the Warhead says, please do a show on 9/11. And we're probably going to need to wrap up here. Please elaborate on VBN ties to Operation Gladio, and that is really a show, and how that relates to the proxy war. Yeah, this is a great, this is a great idea for a show, really. It's also a show that this show looks really dangerous, because one of the things we don't do a lot of talking about is currently unfolding events and the hidden hand. And I have somewhat intentionally stayed away from that on YouTube, because I feel like that would get me a strike somehow, some way. But this to me sounds like a great episode, maybe a BitChute episode that's like where we start on YouTube and then move to BitChute a little ways in. But this is too lengthy for us to insert here in the Warhead.
Yeah, that's a great idea. We can definitely incorporate these elements, and I can make nobody watches my videos anyway. Nobody pays attention. So
that's
I can put
time once they find it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, do a show on 9/11. I'm ready for that.
And Kingmaker says, if then I be single, indeed, talking about meditating on the third eye. Then someone said, Relic One said, I never heard about the thing with the farmers in Oregon. I haven't either. I've heard about farmers being told to plow their crops under. It does ring a faint bell, and we'll have to look it up.
I'm pretty sure it was Oregon.
So
yeah.
I think you might be right. So it's proof of how well they hide it. So DV Love writes, hallucinogens are popular again and administered by professionals. Yeah, I have mixed feelings about that, because I think you're going to see, if that spreads, you're going to see like good stuff come from it, but unethical psychiatrists who then are using drugs, like be real easy to just have some MK Ultra doctors out there. They already do, a lot of these, a lot of these shooter kids will have the same psychiatrist as other shooter kids, which the odds of that are zero. That look like MK Ultra handlers to me. So yeah,
it's all MK. It's all MK Ultra.
Hallucinogens becoming popular. Interesting for sure. Does it make me a professional that I administer to myself? I don't know. Maybe.
Absolutely.
Christy Lee says she's going to check back and watch from the beginning. Great. Relic One said.
Oh, nice.
Let's see. So Similar Prisoner says, which depiction mullet came first, owl or bull, and what's the origin of each? Well, we kind of already covered most of this. I honestly don't know which one came first. I did explain earlier in the episode the symbolism around the owl and the bull. And so I don't know the answer to the first part of your question, unfortunately, and the second part I already answered earlier in the show. So Gustavo Ria Music had some really interesting stuff. He goes, Ferrisi and Torlonia.
Farnese, the Farnese family.
This guy knows his stuff. Maxima are older and have Jericho than Toloria, and they came from the gens Fabia. Fantastic. What incredible.
Right. The Fabius Maximus clan. Yeah, that's what some people.
Two-person study and talk about to fully understand this topic. Gonzalo Contarini
and Paolo Sarfi. Yeah. Okay, good idea. They were Venetian intriguers, brilliant men, but they were able to kind of subvert the epistemology of Europe. They were incredibly influential and powerful in the spread of, I would call it Venetianism. But that Paolo Sarpi, both of them extremely influential and famous and game masters par excellence.
Yeah. Fantastic comment, Gustavo Ria Music. This guy really knows his stuff. This is what it was like. We're beginning to have a community form around this channel, and people are sharing information. There was some incredible stuff on Henry VIII's Pallavicini, I think it was, handler, that someone was putting in the comments of the episode 1. They had a whole subthread about it. We need to write that stuff down lest the algorithm delete it. Philip's energy is definitely in tune with some divine power. Can't explain it, but you can tell what spiritual practice, if any, to utilize. Oh, that's a question for you, Philip. I'm gonna go to the bathroom. I'll be right back. Go ahead, answer that.
Okay. Wow, thank you. I really appreciate that. That's gonna carry me through the day, really? That's a good question. I do meditate every morning. No matter how early I have to get up, I always get up an hour early. I try to give myself an hour. 90 minutes is better. And I suppose what I do is I try to tune into or create my reality. Does that make sense? When I can relax the mind and project and suggest images to my sort of halfway in that twilight state, and I feel that I'm connecting. It's a really full experience when you feel like you can see images that you're suggesting to yourself that seem to hold the fruits of your desires and your wishes, and you kind of, it sounds really abstract because I guess I don't follow any specific practice. I've been influenced by the Silva method and also Dr. Dispenza, where he talks about your subconscious mind doesn't know the difference between fantasy and reality, and if you can summon or conjure through a kind of a relaxed state combined with an intention, and you can attain an elevated emotion, then you can, if you do this repeatedly, it's like your whole self begins to be able to memorize that state, and then you increase that through daily practice. So it's very much about, I really believe that we are infinite beings and that there's no limit to what we can do. And so I try to always stray a little farther and push that understanding and get beyond any kind of limiting self-definitions or prefabricated concepts. So, and I do it in the evening too. So probably two and a half hours of meditation a day at the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And it's because I believe there's nothing that comes. You don't need this is just my view. You don't need a belief system. You don't need concepts. You could go there directly. And if anything is in the way, you can find a way to get through that. So, and then of course, you know, there's a certain amount of me that really depends on outside influences, good outside influences. Ian, for instance, has opened me up. Hey, maybe I can look into this. Maybe I should be a little more open to that. It seems to be there's something real there that I'm attracted to, and my vibration level is rising as as this has come into my life. So. Yeah, but I appreciate that. I don't know if it gives you some indication, but I really every day I have to meditate for at least an hour before I start anything.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna hit just a couple more questions, and then we really need to get off. I got shadow banned by your Luciferian. I unsubscribed and reported. Someone wrote this funny. I'm not sure what they're talking about. I unsubscribed and reported. Okay. No idea what they're talking about. So this other person wrote, and this is maybe one of the last ones I need to do because there's a lot more from some people who got quite a bit of. I do want to show this though. This is funny. Bye, Felicia. Thank you, Relic One. The whole bye, Felicia thing from a few years ago. Well done, Relic One. Give me a shout out there. So this is just to answer. It's the last question from someone who hasn't gotten a question answered yet. Sorry, Rick and Relic and all the other people and Tank who did great commentary questions, but I do want people who haven't gotten any yet. Do you fear an outlast that would significantly impede the majority of humanity to survive if the Malachians realize they lost? Well, I mean, that's just it. I mean, people keep asking me, look, why aren't the Luciferians like taking more decisive action? They're trying to carefully peel the fingers of the Malachians off the grips of the levers of power without the Malachians realizing it. And so they have to do it very carefully, you know, and it's like that. As much as I hate Kevin Spacey and House of Cards. There is a good quote from it, and he says, well, how do you eat a whale? One bite at a time. So that's what, when you're dealing with an incredibly powerful system, you first have to figure out how you're going to get rid of that system. And the answer is you trick the people who run that system into destroying their own system with the promise that they're going to be able to replace it with an even more despotic and evil system, the Great Reset. But you need to lead them down the garden path to a point of no return, and then you can make your move, and not before, because if you don't have certain things in place, they'll realize what you're up to and do exactly what you're talking about here. Set off some nukes, biolab leaks, whatever. Of course, they have to find people on the ground who are willing to do those insane actions, and that might be difficult, because sure, there's crazy shooters, but you notice there's not a lot of crazy people going around setting off nukes, because the handlers aren't going to go along with that. The people who are actually sane that run the shooters, they're evil, but they're sane, and they're running these MK Ultra shooters or whatever. They don't want a nuclear war, so they're not going to touch off a nuke. They'll refuse. So crazy people won't have access, and the people who would have access to these things will likely refuse out of self-interest. So, but if there's enough of the power structure in place that's Malachian flavored, then yes, they can do these kind of scorched earth tactics, salting the earth behind them, burning bridges kind of stuff. And that's exactly why the Luciferians have to play their cards really close to the chest and wait for the moment to spring. And it's going to happen, and it's going to start happening very soon, because very, very soon, true elite conflicts are going to break out. I am not even convinced that some of the things we see right now aren't actually have an organic or real aspect to them. Namely, I think there's a split between Davos and China. I really, really do. And I think that most of the CCP is Malachian, and I think, of course, Davos is Malachian. And I think that they're both getting played by Luciferians that are inside the CCP or inside the European power structure. And they're also trying to do business with each other right up to the bitter end, and trying to see if they can bribe or get the other one on board and then take advantage again. Like Davos, I think, is trying to bring China back into the fold. But China sees a chance to become their own power in all of this. And they realize that the Malachian Davos set was never going to give them power. That was never part of the plan. And the Chinese are realizing this, and also realizing the precarious position they're in terms of food security and things like this, and they're taking self-interested action. And so very real fractures, both among the Malachians themselves and also from the various Luciferian factions, right? Because when I say Luciferian Malachian, it's not all some monolithic group. It's factions within it that are at a certain level of consciousness, basically. And that the Luciferian faction is actually a group of factions that all have the same general principles. And the Malachians are a group of factions, although they tended to be more monolithic just because of that hive mind ability they have. It's both a great strength and a great weakness. It centralizes control, but that also means that if you just take out the brain, then it's over, right? If you take out the central part of the control, then it falls apart. Whereas the Luciferians are lots of individuals that are working together in self-interested alliances. And so it's not a clear-cut and concrete thing where it's just these guys are wearing black uniforms and these guys are wearing white uniforms. It's nothing like that. It's much more complicated, just like human nature. But I believe that the Luciferians, the people who are the adults in the room that are more sane and the cooler heads that prevail, will prevail here. But first, they have to make sure that the other people have super overextended, put the noose around their neck, and then they'll pull them up the tree. But they're tricking the Malachians right now to putting that noose around their neck and running out as far as they can and showing everyone that they're totally crazy, and that their vision of you eating bugs and being in a pod and with a chip in your brain that controls your function is so heinous and repulsive that you will go for anything that's offered in opposition to that, including something to where, oh, well, we're keeping digital ID. Oh, well, we're keeping electronic money and surveillance. Oh, well, we're going to go ahead and keep our wealth, and the wealth disparity will continue. And oh, sorry, but there's going to be classes and meritocracy and whatever. Some of the things we don't like about the Malachian system will continue, but a lot of the worst excesses of it will be gone, including pedophilia. And if it was just pedophilia was removed, I feel so passionately about that singular issue that if one group simply said they would stop doing that, that would be good enough to me, would show a huge improvement in humanity. And they offer a lot more than that. Again, don't worship Lucifer unless you feel called to. I'm not telling you what to do. I won't. I'm not gonna. I don't agree with that. I'm very familiar with that being. Have interacted with a lot, and I have respect in a certain way for that being, but I see that being as being lost. It's a false light. And so hopefully that answers your question. I'm not afraid about it. I do think that a lot of people are going to die in the next 7 years, and already are dying with from the pokey poke, among other things. And soon there'll be starvation in the periphery in the third world and so forth. And so I'm going to real quick see if there's anyone new. Anarcha Gaming, I'll maybe see if this is quick. Okay, so Anarcha Gaming, I astral project. I've seen the other people that are not our friends. Huh, that is a very interesting comment. Anarcha Gaming. I definitely know that astral projection is quite real. Excellent conversation. I missed a lot of stuff. Okay. The Queen Bee has many drones. Yep, that's certainly true. The Trudeau Foundation CEO and board resigned today. Does that have anything to do with the friction between the factions? Wow, I wasn't aware of that, but I would say probably, yeah. Another thing I've been wondering a lot about, and then this is probably where I need to wrap up because we've gone quite long, is that I've come around on this idea. I've actually come around on it a while ago. I don't think people are being replaced by clones, although it's possible. That seems unnecessary to me and overly complicated. Occam's razor says what we're seeing when we see these people who look very, very different, including in ways that you can't be, like having unattached earlobes or attached earlobes, that never changes over the course of your life. There's no, he's older now, his earlobes are attached or unattached. So like Biden, this is not Joe Biden, the senator. This person we see in front of us, and I think there's more than one, and it's especially easy to do with sunglasses and a mask, by the way, right? So the COVID theater has helped all this. I think a lot of these people are being replaced by doubles, clones, but actors who are playing that role. It's something that's gone on since the dawn of time. People being replaced by doubles. It's not new. And it just hasn't been employed that I'm aware of in modern times at anything like to the degree to which it seems to be being employed now. And the reason I bring that up is Trudeau, the current Trudeau, is a much heavier set, less attractive man. I mean, the other Trudeau, I'm not trying to say he was a good guy, he's trash as well. But this Trudeau they have in there now, I do not believe is the same Trudeau that was in there like 5 years ago or whatever. There's a number of people that seem to have been replaced. John Fetterman, like, that is not the same guy. You got this lurch, had a baby with Sloth from Goonies looking guy who wins the Senate election and goes to Walter Reed, and then out comes this handsome, suave version of John Fetterman who looks vaguely the same because he's bald. It's not the same guy. It's like a sloppy putting someone in. There's also examples of people who are wealthy that seem to have been replaced. Zuckerberg, it's not the same guy that founded Facebook. No way. His head's way different shaped. That doesn't happen. Your head doesn't like elongate and your forehead become 3 times longer or whatever. Like, you know, and the old Zuckerberg, if you watch all interviews with him and stuff, sure, he's on the spectrum, but he was human. This new Zuckerberg, you could maybe sell me on that guy's a clone or not human. Like I might be willing to make that purchase. And And then let's see, who's the other one? There's another. Oh yeah, Bill and Melinda Gates seem to have been replaced by doubles. And so, who's doing that? Is it the Malachians? Is it Luciferians? I don't know. And so, yeah, the Black Eye Gang, someone's talking about. I mean, that's another weird thing going on. You also see like the Will Smith, Chris Rock, like ritual humiliation thing, whatever the heck was going on there. There's all sorts of weird stuff. But anyways, Philip, did you want to add any final thoughts? And then we'll wrap it up here. And sorry for the folks I couldn't get to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. Thank you. A wonderful input. And it's great to feel this community coalescing. I would say there was some material that I got to we don't have time for today. But it's interesting as I challenged my view of, you know, Habsburg and this pan-Europeanism and HRE, he articulates at some places some really beautiful concepts. It's obvious that Otto von Habsburg was for health, basically the health and fitness of human beings and healthy food source. And I think in some way he was hoping to revive like exactly what's being attacked in the United States, which is small farmers, family farms, attachment to the land, healthy food supply. He very much emphasized this, and I think what he was in his mind, stripping away the artificial projections that are nations and going back to, I don't want to say more primitive, because we all rely on this. You see, it's very scary when they start to attack, you know, family farms. Or you're not allowed to have family farms. You can get you can go to jail for. Eventually, it's going to be like this. And I wish I had time to go into this. I had some quotes here, but I was very surprised to find elements in Otto von Habsburg's vision that were actually quite beautiful. And so it challenged my whole view of this whole operation. And I think perhaps this is when I get to Vienna, this is what I'm going to ask and talk about these the positive elements in what Otto was about. Specifically, he would absolutely be against the GMOs and this, you know, mass production of substandard foods by major corporations. This is exactly 180 degrees opposite of what Otto von Habsburg was articulating during his life. So there may be something valuable in there as we're talking about, Ian, you know, the difference between Luciferian and Malachians. And I'll leave it there, but I was surprised to find some really wonderful things in his vision. And when I come back, I could share the results of my interactions with the family, and
that's
as
awesome.
we move forward. Yeah.
I just wanted to let people know, the 31 people who are viewing this and then people who watch it later. I about 3 times a year, maybe 4, open up angelic magic classes. The one I did this last fall was kind of semi-legendary in the group and led to some really amazing transformation in my own life.
Yeah.
I have one slot left for the East Coast time zone and 5 slots left for the West Coast time zone. So if you're interested in that, you can go to my website, www.whitelotusoflight.com. Just drop me an inquiry about the angelic magic classes. You'll find it on the consultations page, and I just scroll down. It's going to be starting on May 4th. May the 4th be with you. It's starting on May 4th, which is a Thursday, and it will be going about every other Thursday for about 6-7 weeks, something like that. And I have it listed on there what the specific days are. But yeah, if you would like to learn how to contact the angels and work with them to affect change in your life and start moving and aligning yourself in that direction of the current of the Most High, if that speaks to you, then drop me a line and you can join the class. Only open up a few times a year, and this one's just about half filled now. So there were only 10 slots to begin with, and 4 of them have been filled. So thank you so much. And Philip, I will see you again very soon. We'll have to talk offline about where we're going to go with the series next, whether we want to do another live chat or whether we want to do a longer deep dive into something where it's just more conversational
Right.
without the pressure of the live chat. So much pressure, guys. Saying all these nice
Yeah.
It was a bit nerve-wracking at first when Philip wasn't here quite yet.
Yeah, you have to Mongolia, where like go to New York time and then just 12 hours later.
Yeah.
So you probably thought I was late. You probably thought it, like, for me it was 5 o'clock, but 6 anyway.
Well, thank you, Macman. Thank you, Jess Ass.
Thanks everybody. This is really great, and thanks for the boost on my spirituality. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Philip, of course. Thank you, Shanjack. Thank you, Macman, Sarah Boros, Relic One. Well, Chip Wellington, I guess you unsubscribed and reported. But thank you anyways for having a great name of Chip Wellington. I hope that your monocle dropped, Chip, when you. I've been shadow banned by Jeff. I won't stand for it. The monocle, hit the unsubscribe button with your monocle. And if that's the it truly is our loss that you're no longer part of the community.
Absolutely. No doubt.
Rick is a longtime subscriber and puts great comments up all the time. Billion Iastagi, I'm just going to put your name up because I have no idea how to pronounce that. Violin IA stage, maybe? Belong? No, that's not violin. Never mind. I don't know how to say it. Chad Warren, he did a little wave. JT Corey, Kingmaker, Gustavo Ria Music, great comments, Gustavo. Really top shelf stuff, gives me places to jump from. Yeah, please comment more, Gustavo. Please share the information you have, because that I can tell when someone knows what they're talking about, and you clearly do. Thank you, Similar Prisoners, DB Love, Christy Lee, for when you come back and watch this later. 11K, who was a professional hallucinogen administrator to themselves. DB Love, I think I already said. Tank, Legion of Lilith, you came on. Dimitri, good to see you. The Warhead, Ingrid S. I think we're running out. Ryan Lone, I think everyone else we've already covered. I'm just scrolling through. Truth Seeker had a great question about Genghis Khan. And Hom, and I'm going to put up Hom. Oh, it's Simply Lucid. Thank you, Simply Lucid. I'm going to put up Hom just here. Oh, no, that's not the comment I wanted to put up, but this one. Thank you so much. This was I love these kind of comments, you guys. It means so much to me. We get a lot of nonsense comments, so it's
That's nice. On point. That's on point. That comment is totally on point.
Param Sharma, who was here early, not sure they're still with us because it's been a long stream. Oops, I didn't mean to put up Tank. I meant to put up Param Sharma. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day. And Anarchy Gaming said, keep glowing, Philip. JT Cora said, thank you both.
Thank you.
Later, Chip. It was on point with Chip Wellington, but Chip is a product of superior breeding, Relic. Unlike us, shiftless layabouts, proletariat. What would they say? They wouldn't say proles. What's the Victorian era insult for like the rabble? Oh, they're such a good word for what?
Plebs.
Yeah, plebs. Yes, you plebs. Us plebs will never know what we've lost in Chip Wellington. So, all right. Thank you so much, everyone. I think I already said thank you, Jess, but yeah. All right. See you all later and have a good one. All right. Bye.
Okay. See you. Bye.